Chapter 1604. The Judges from Sakura Country. Was this guy the mastermind? Bufong, who was sitting leisurely on the sofa, slowly turned his head and looked at the judge. Bufong wasn't too sure about the judge's identity, but he had sensed that the judge's body was filled with dense spiritual energy. The density of the spiritual energy was not much weaker than Yuji's. A cultivator from a remote place like Sakura Island? The judge's aura was obviously different from those ninjas. When Yamashima Tanjiro, who was tied up by Little Who's tail, saw the judge appear, he hurriedly opened his eyes wide and cried for help. In his eyes, the judge seemed to have become his last life-saving straw. The judge looked at Tanjiro and shook his head in disappointment. However, he still looked at Bufong curiously. Previously, he had felt that Bufong was not ordinary. A bowl of instant noodles was able to conquer the 5 judges. He had personally sensed that the instant noodles didn't contain any impurities, not even spirit energy. In other words, just the pure taste of the instant noodles had conquered them. This kind of cooking skill could be called heaven-defying. Do you know where the ship is heading? The judge said with a faint smile. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Yamada. Yes. Bufong nodded in response to the judge's self-introduction. Yamada no Orochi narrowed his eyes. How could you respond so calmly when I told you my name? He shook his head, and the next moment his aura suddenly changed. Behind him, there was actually a black energy slowly dispersing, floating around his body. Hiss, small black snakes crawled out from his loose robe. Forget it. You won't have a chance to know the destination of this jewel anyway, so I won't tell you too much. Are you ready to taste hell? Yamada no Orochi smiled. Then, he took a step forward, and the wooden clogs on his feet clanged against the floor. Yamada no Kuma. My God, he's one of the top 3 S-class arcanists in Sakura Island. Yamada no Orochi was very famous. When Xiao AI heard this name, she immediately exclaimed, S-class arcanists are very famous in the world, and everyone knows what it means to be an S-class arcanist. You can call me that too, but I prefer everyone to call me God's chosen one. I'm the one chosen by Orochi. Yamada no Orochi laughed. This was the right way to open it. Boom! In the blink of an eye, his figure moved. Buzz Little Who flicked his tail. Yamashima Tanjiro, who was tied up, immediately shot out. Orochi did not dodge at all. The snake in his hand shot out and instantly bit Yamashima Tanjiro black. Yamashima Tanjiro didn't even have time to scream before he died. Great God, Yamada no Orochi? The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. This so-called great god should be one of the group of people behind the fake Spirit Chi revival. In the distance, Yuga sneered. Orochi, it's just a snake monster in Sakura Island. In the distance, no one knew when Yuga had appeared. He pinched his fingers into a sword and instantly charged at Yamada no Orochi. Before Bufong could make a move, Yuga and Yamada no Orochi had already started fighting. The two of them were locked in a fierce battle. As a chi cultivator from the immortal island of Panlai, Yuga did not have a good impression of Yamada no Orochi. This snake, who called himself a great god, was just an earth immortal snake monster. A few immortal patriarchs from the immortal island of Panlai were enough to crush that snake monster. Now, a mere snake monster dared to make trouble in front of him. A chi cultivator from Hua, an earth-class chi cultivator. Yamada no Orochi narrowed his eyes. In his hand, snakes kept growing. They were so dense that they seemed to have turned into snake whips that lashed out fiercely. Boom! The snake whip collided with the sword energy, causing an explosion. Bam! The entire luxury suite exploded in an instant. Everyone on the cruise ship was shocked by the scene. Everyone rushed out of their rooms and looked around in confusion. The security guards, who had missed their target, were now closing in quickly. The battle between Yuga and Yamada no Orochi was very fierce. Their strength was not that different. An Earth-class chi cultivator was equivalent to an S-class superhuman, so their battle was quite a big one. Xiao AI hid in a corner, secretly recording everything. If the battle of S-class superhumans could be recorded, It would be very helpful for the study of superpowers. Bufong watched calmly as he helped Xiao AI block most of the energy fluctuations. Of course, energy fluctuations of this level were nothing to him. Bam! The more Yuga fought, the angrier he became. The two of them rushed out of the room, soared into the sky, and rushed toward the immensity sea, stepping on it to fight. The scene immediately caused the people on the cruise ship to exclaim. Most of the people on the cruise ship were ordinary people, and they had never seen such a legendary battle. Everyone had a look of shock on their faces. The ability users who were hiding in the crowd frowned when they saw this scene. Things had gotten out of hand, and they had to do something. Umipa, it's really exciting. The monk, one of the judges, looked at the battle with a smile. Toot, toot. The ship's whistle sounded, and thick smoke billowed. The ship sped up and sailed on the immensity sea, heading in a certain direction. The ship, which was moving slowly, was now speeding through the night. Bam. Columns of water shot up into the sky. Sword energy swept across the sky. Yuji's strength was actually very good, but when he met Bufong, he was captured before he could use it. At that time, he had resisted a little, but in front of Bufong, his resistance was not obvious. In fact, Yuga was also one of the small group of people who stood at the top of this world. Bufong stood in front of the cracked wall with his hands clasped behind his back. Xiao AI was recording something excitedly. Suddenly, Bufong raised his eyebrows slightly. He glanced at the bottom of the sea. His eyes flashed. Yugo and Yamada no Orochi were also fighting to their heart's content. Unfortunately, if his sword had not been broken by Bufong, he might have been able to fight even more fiercely. Boom! All of a sudden, the water exploded. A figure rushed up from the water and approached Yugo in a flash. Yugo was shocked, and a chill began to spread from the soles of his feet. An expert holding a sharp katana rushed up from the bottom of the sea. This man had been hiding under the sea, waiting for a fatal blow. Now he had found a chance. Yamada, no wolf. He's another S-class superhuman from Sakura Island. Xiao AI's glasses reflected the light as she said seriously. She had all the information. Yugo was in danger now, and his scalp went numb. He patted the sword gourd on his waist, and streams of sword energy shot out of it. Although the sword gourd had suffered a big loss when fighting against Bufong, after some time of recuperation, it could still launch an attack. Bam! 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 The sharp samurai sword slashed downwards. Yuji's face turned unsightly because he found that his sword gourd had almost been cut into pieces by the slash. No, it seemed that he couldn't beat this guy. Yuji's face changed dramatically. In an instant, he stepped on the waves and ran toward the ship at full speed. Yamada no Yako and Yamada no Yako sneered. Run. I've exposed so many secrets. How can I let you escape? Kill him. China clearly promised not to interfere with this spiritual energy point. Now, this chi cultivator deserves to die. Yamada no Yako narrowed his eyes, which were bursting with strong, killing intent and excitement. Killing a Hua Chi cultivator was a kind of spiritual satisfaction for him, and he could not wait. Bam! 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 Stepping on the waves, the two of them chased after Yugo. The people on the ship cried out in alarm. Many people even took out their phones and recorded the scene. An immortal-like figure was chasing someone on the sea. How exciting! On the ship, the monk in the Kasaya leaned forward slightly as if he was about to make a move. As a Hua man, he naturally could not watch Yugo, a Hua Chi cultivator, be killed by a Sakura man. However, just as he was about to make a move, two silhouettes had appeared beside him without him noticing. Their auras were drawn and locked onto him. One was a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes. If Xiao AI were here, she would definitely recognize him. He was the handsome man who had invited her to dance. The other was a mixed-race beauty, the one who failed to flirt with Bufong and ended up being flirted with instead. These two were S-class superhumans as well. They had locked onto the monk and prevented him from making a move. Senior, help me. Yugu rushed over with a sullen look on his face. Shameless. I was almost killed. He shouted at Bufong. Many people were stunned. Yamada no Yako and Yamada no Yako sneered. Senior? That chef? His spiritual energy is so weak. What would he do? Kill him. Yamada no Yako roared. His arm suddenly swelled, and his sleeve burst apart. A ferocious snake head emerged from it, turned into a giant snake, and lunged at Yuga. The sea exploded, and one snake head after another soared into the sky. Yuga felt a chill run down his spine. Yamada no Yako waved the famed knife in his hand. The knife energy shot out, turned into a half-moon slash, and headed straight for Yuga. This was a deadly situation. No one thought Yuga could survive. Even the monk had given up on making a move. Even if he did, he might not be able to save Yuga. Senior. Yuga ran as fast as he could, roaring. Huh? Who is Senior calling? Many people did not know what was going on. Suddenly, some sharp-eyed people saw a figure slowly walking out of the broken room. That was right. Just like that, he walked out unhurriedly. Walking in the air, he was as ethereal as an immortal. Yuga breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Bufong. Bufong's figure flashed and appeared behind Yuga in a flash. But one snake head after another approached, biting at him. Bufong's eyelids drooped. The moment the snake head approached, his eyes widened. His pupils shone brightly. The snakeheads were scared out of their wits, as if they had encountered the most terrible thing in the world. They went from strong to weak and listless. Rumble, with Bufong's body as the center. An invisible wave of air slowly spread out. Bam! Yamada no Yako was thrown backward, blood spurting from his mouth. His face was full of horror and disbelief. Bufong raised his hand, pointed at him, and pointed a finger at him. Bam! Yamada no Yako's body exploded, smashed into the sea, and sank to the bottom of the sea. Yamada no Yako howled. Holding the famed knife with both hands, he slashed it down. The knife light was so sharp that it seemed to reflect people's eyes. Facing Yamada no Yako, Bufong, on the other hand, was even more casual. He raised his hand and slapped out. It was a light slap, but before it could get close, the knife in Yamada no Yako's hand broke. Yamada no Yako's knife was broken. Splash. The sea splashed, and Yamada no Yako was nowhere to be seen. 2 S-class superhumans from Sakura Island were killed in an instant. Yuga stepped on the waves. He watched as Bufong easily killed 2 S-class superhumans with a finger and a palm. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Senior is still my senior. He's worthy of being the man who can crush a lightning tribulation. Everyone on the ship was dumbfounded. Is he still human? Xiao AI was dumbfounded. How could an S-class superhuman be killed just like that? Who the hell is this Bufong? How strong is he? The pupils of the monk and the 2 Western superhumans on the ship constricted. The 3 of them looked at each other, feeling incredulous. However, just when everyone thought that the matter was about to end, a voice suddenly rang out. Bufong did not return to the ship. Instead, he frowned. Sneaking around. Come out, Bufong said faintly. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the boundless sea in front of him. Bam! 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 The sea in front of him was split in half in the middle, and the water poured down. A huge wave came. A huge serpent tail was pulled out from his sea. Yuga, standing behind Bufong, was dumbfounded. He sucked in a breath of cold air. What the hell? Yamada no Orochi. Chapter 1605. Swoosh. The waves were tumbling. It caused a deafening roar. With a loud bang, the waves were split in half from the middle. A serpent tail was pulled out of the sea by Bufong. The tail was huge and covered with patterned snake scales. The ship was hit by the huge waves and shook violently. Everyone gasped as they looked at the huge serpent tail. What? What is that? There were countless ordinary people on the ship. They had never seen such a creature before, so they were so scared that they could not speak properly. It looks like a serpent's tail. Such a big serpent tail. Some people's hands that were holding their phones lost their balance, causing them to fall into the sea. Bam! Huge waves tumbled. The mortals on the ship were even more horrified. A monster! The superhumans on the ship also looked solemn and incredulous. Orochi hiss. It's Yamada no Orochi, the giant monster in the legends of Sakura Island. The superhumans were a little frightened. After awakening their abilities, they realized that this world was not ordinary. The legends and the myths might really exist. The scene of Yuga and the Orochi brothers fighting had given them a lot of stimulation. It was like a battle between immortals, which had completely subverted their ideas. Xiao Ai's hand, which was holding the computer, was trembling. Orochi, this kind of mythical monster, also appeared. The world was not peaceful at all. If Orochi was classified according to its level, it would probably reach the SS level. Could he stop this Yamada no Orochi? If they couldn't stop it, everyone present would become food for the Yamada no Orochi. According to historical records, this monster was extremely ferocious. Bufong hovered in midair, his brows slightly raised. He waved his hand. Bam! The serpent's tail was lifted high. All of a sudden, an explosion rang out. Bufong furrowed his brows. Around his body, there were bulges floating in the seawater. The seawater was flowing backward. Yugo was shocked, and his heart shrank. He raised his hand, and suddenly, the sword chi in his hand fluctuated. An earth-ranked chi cultivator facing in Yamada no Orochi would probably be slapped to death. On the ship, Tyrant and the superhumans from the west were livid. Those bastards from Sakura Island really have no credibility. Not only did Yamada no Yalang appear, but now even Yamada no Orochi appeared. This Yamada no Orochi must have been lurking all the way, wanted to kill us all in one fell swoop when we opened the spiritual energy point. The monk was wearing a kasaya, but he spat on the ground and cursed. The two Western paranormals also felt a headache coming on. Yamada no Orochi, that was a mythical existence. If they really fought, they would only be able to escape. Moreover, there were so many people on the ship. Once Yamada no Orochi went crazy, no one on the ship would be able to escape. To them, this was not good news. The people on the ship were all extraordinary. If all of them died, it would cause a huge shock to the entire world. Therefore, they could only brace themselves and do it. Bam, bam, bam. Suddenly, the seawater exploded. A terrifying aura spread out. One after another, dark shadows emerged. 1, 2, 3. 8 huge heads rushed out of the sea in a row, splashing countless waves. Each of the 8 snake heads was different. They flicked their tongues, exuding a terrifying aura. In addition to the 8 heads, 8 tails also emerged from the sea, tossing and turning. Dark clouds seemed to be sweeping across the sky. In this dark night, it was as if a storm was about to come. In the ship, the mortals saw the behemoth. The 100,000-ton ship, the Jewel, looked a little small in front of this giant serpent. It showed how big the serpent was. 8 heads and 8 tails. This was really a giant serpent that had walked out of the myths. The mortals were uneasy. Some of them even cried bitterly and lay on the ground, their legs weak. In the face of such a creature, all they had left was despair. It was too horrible. The aura that filled the air made them feel despair. Yamada no Orochi represented disaster, and it radiated despair. At this moment, he had reached the extreme. Uge's face darkened. He swallowed and glanced at Bufong, who was floating in the air with an expressionless face. "Senior, I have faith in you," Yuga said solemnly. Then, he turned around and dashed toward the ship. Bufong did not care about Uge's escape. It was useless for him to stay. Yamada no Orochi must have reached the legendary level of an Earth Immortal. Yuga was just an Earth Chi cultivator. He could not play any role in the face of an Earth Immortal. The monk and the 2 Western superhumans tensed up. Their strength was not much stronger than Uge's. Unless the trump cards of their respective countries appeared, they had no chance of defeating Yamada no Orochi. Everyone was in danger. Bufong, on the other hand, was calm. He studied the serpent curiously. However, after taking a closer look, he curled his lips and did not care much. In his eyes, the serpent was nothing but a reptile. Of course, even if his cultivation base was suppressed and restrained, it did not matter to Bufang. Buzz, Yamada, no Orochi's 8 heads locked onto Bufang's body. The eyes on each head glowed scarlet like lanterns. Some of the heads even had drool dripping from their mouths. Everyone's jaws dropped. Waves surged. Yamada, no Orochi roared at Bufang. How dare this puny human offend me? Die. One of its heads shot toward Bufang like an arrow shot from a bow, trying to swallow Bufang in an instant. This scene caused everyone's faces to turn pale with fright. This monster really knows how to eat people. Xiao Ai's legs went weak. Yuga sucked in a cold breath. However, he secretly cheered himself on. Senior is an immortal. Senior is the best. Thousands of kilometers away from the jewel, a ship was sailing slowly. The hull of the ship was painted with the pattern of Sakura Island. In the command room of the ship, many men in military uniforms were sitting in chairs. Looking at the screen in front of them, their faces were filled with fanaticism. Yamada no Orochi has made his move. The jewel will be destroyed. In this way, the spiritual energy ceiling point will belong to us. I've invited the most famous chef in our country. This time, the opportunity of the spiritual energy ceiling point will belong to us. If you want to become stronger, you have to be ruthless. The officers in the command room were talking among themselves. They were fanatical and excited. There were 4 spiritual energy ceiling points in the world, and Sakura Island was about to enjoy one of them. This would be of great help to the strength of Sakura Island. Admiral Yamada, no Orochi, we can't hide our news for long. The chi cultivators of Hua and the chosen ones of the Western countries will be here soon. We have to end this quickly. Don't worry. Yamada no Orochi is a god who has woken up from a deep sleep in the myth. He can help us solve everything. Bam! An invisible wave of air slowly spread out in all directions. Invisible ripples seemed to appear on the surface of the sea. At this moment, the atmosphere seemed to have come to a standstill. Everyone's eyes widened. Looking at the scene in front of them, they felt frightened and incredulous. Yamada no Orochi's head was pressed down. It rushed over, tried to swallow Bufang's head. However, Bufang stopped it with a slap, and it couldn't move an inch forward. The huge head of the snake wanted to crush the human with great force, but it found that it couldn't do it at all. Bufang's face was calm. With one hand clasped behind his back, he raised the other hand and grabbed the snake's head. His palm exerted a little force, and his fingers bent. Puff! Yamada no Orochi suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from its head. The pain made its scarlet lantern eyes widen. The surrounding heads were like cobras, opening their membranes on both sides. A strange sound wave burst out. Waves of energy surged toward Bufang. The sound wave was sharp and harsh, as if it could make people's heads explode. Many people on the ship bled from their mouths and noses under the sound wave. They collapsed to the ground, trembling. The faces of the monk and the Western superhumans changed. The monk put his palms together, sitting cross-legged on the ground, mumbling something. Instantly, the unique sound of Sanskrit filled the air, turning into a golden light that shrouded everyone present. The sound wave was isolated. Bam! Bam! The destructive power of the sound wave was really strong. The seawater exploded, splashing unceasingly. Bufang slightly furrowed his brows. He slapped down. Bam! One of Yamada no Orochi's heads was smashed deep into the sea, causing the seawater to explode. Snake meat is not bad. It can be used as an ingredient. It should be good to make snake meat soup. Bufang clapped his hands, saying casually. The people around exchanged looks. Snake meat soup? That was a mythical existence. You want to make it into snake meat soup? Is it really that awesome? The seawater exploded again. Yamada no Orochi roared and rose. Its eyes were red. His tail lashed out, and crackling sound could be heard as the air was smashed into pieces. The snakes' heads opened their mouths, spurting out black, poisonous gas. Each of Yamada no Orochi's heads had its own tricks. Some of the heads exploded with sound waves, some spurted water columns, some spewed poisonous gas, and some spewed flames. All kinds of strange energy were dazzling and mesmerizing. However, no matter how many tricks he used, Bufong was as calm as still water, hovering in the void. Of course, he could deal with it with one slap. Bufong leisurely stepped in the void. The strange energy disappeared automatically when it was 1 inch away from Bufong's body. As a result, from a distance, Bufong's body seemed to be blooming with divine light. Yamada no Orochi. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched, and his eyes focused. Bufong didn't have a good impression of Yamada no Orochi. He raised one hand. A giant snakehead hissed at him. Bam! However, halfway through his roar, Bufong slapped him in the face. Boom! It was like an explosion. Everyone's eyes widened into saucers. The hissing snake's head was directly slapped off by Bufong's palm. That's right, it was slapped off. The giant snakehead fell off from Yamada no Orochi's body, falling into the sea. Cold blood soaked the water. The remaining 7 heads of Yamada no Orochi immediately showed fear and rage. Yamada no Orochi was not stupid. After all, it had cultivated to this level, so it had a certain degree of intelligence. This human in front of it had slapped one of its heads, which meant that it had 8 heads. How could he fight it? So, he didn't hesitate. With a plop, Yamada no Orochi dove into the sea, trying to escape. It didn't matter if it lost a head. It could grow back with some nourishment. However, if it lost its life, it couldn't be replenished. Yamada no Orochi had a strong desire to live. It fled in a panic. Running away, the corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. The snake's soup hasn't been made yet. How can I let the food that has been delivered to my door run away like this? Bufong said faintly. Then, he descended and stepped on the surface of the sea. His hand went deep into the sea, and then he pulled. Boom! The seawater exploded. A huge palm condensed of seawater emerged, grabbing the 8 tails of Yamada no Orochi. Then, it pulled him out of the sea alive. It was as if there was a violent storm, and the sound of splashing rang out incessantly. Countless fishes and shrimps were even swaying in the water. In the distance, on the Sakura Island ship, the command room was silent. The officers' faces were livid. Then, one of them slapped the table angrily. Launch the fighter jets. Help Yamada no Orochi with all your strength. This operation must succeed. Failure is not an option. The officer's order was given, and it spread in an instant. On the ship, a roar resounded. On the deck, fighter jets shot up into the sky like snakes of fire, flying toward Bufong. Chapter 1606. Bam! The officer of Sakura Island was furious. Everything was about to succeed, but an accident had happened. Who is that Hua man? Why isn't there any record of him in the intelligence? Is the intelligence department a freeloader? A Hua man who can stop Yamada no Orochi. How could there be no news about him? Yamada no Orochi was being suppressed on the screen. The officer's face turned even more livid. That was Yamada no Orochi, the mythical existence of Sakura Island, an existence that could turn the world upside down. Yet, it was being teased by a Hua man. This was intolerable. The faces of many officers around him darkened. They did not expect such a scene to happen. They were also very anxious. After all, they did not have much time to waste. Send the fighter jets to fight. Don't worry about anything else. First, turn that Hua man into a sieve, and help Yamada no Orochi take down Jewel. The officer gave the order with a cold face. They had to end all this before Hua's reinforcements arrived. As long as they seized the opportunity and seized the spiritual energy ceiling point, Sakura Island would be able to turn over and become the master of the world, jumping on the world stage of the future spiritual energy recovery. At the thought of this, the officers' eyes turned red. One by one, the most advanced fighter jets soared into the sky, causing violent sonic booms and noise. The fighter jets streaked across the sky, leaving a jet of air behind them. With a deafening roar, 5 fighter jets flew in the air in a triangular formation, heading toward Jewel. A distance of thousands of kilometers was not a long distance for the fighter jets, and they arrived in a short time. When the fighter jets arrived, the pilots received the order from the officer and pulled the trigger. Bam! 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 The muzzles of the fighter jets spat out golden tongues of flame, and the bullets turned into a golden dragon that rushed toward the Huaman. The scene in front of them was shocking. The huge palm formed by the seawater dragged Yamada no Orochi out of the sea. What kind of power was this? It could condense the seawater into the shape of a palm. Yamada no Orochi struggled in the palm, but found it difficult to break free. Its tail kept lashing out, its sharp tail like a long sword. Yuga stood in front of the ship's deck and gasped as he watched the scene. Senpai is indeed senpai. So what if it's Yamada no Orochi? In his hands, it's nothing but a reptile? Yuga clenched his fists excitedly. At this moment, the people on the ship also came to their senses, and many people let out cries of surprise. Of course, he was more excited. How could they not be excited? Originally, they thought that they would definitely die, but who would have thought that a superhuman existence would appear and help them block this huge monster? Perhaps this was the blessing of the heavens, or perhaps this was luck. People were cheering. The people who had calmed down took out their mobile phones excitedly again and began to take photos continuously. It would be a pity not to record such an exciting scene. The Arcanists were shocked and felt that it was inconceivable. Could it be that the Immortals of Hua had made a move? It was actually able to block the legendary Yamada no Orochi. Tyrant's face turned pale. He had just used his ability to block Yamada no Orochi's sound wave and was almost seriously injured. Yamada no Orochi was too powerful. However, it was precisely because of this that the monk was even more shocked. The powerful Yamada no Orochi was being toyed with by the young man like a reptile. Who was this young man? Tyrant glanced at Yugu, whose face was flushed with excitement. He recognized Yugu, who was a chi cultivator from the Penglai Deity Island. Could this young man be an earth immortal from the Penglai Deity Island? There were only a few chi cultivator forces in Hua. Only Mount Longhu and Kunlun could send earth immortals. However, the chi cultivators from those two forces would not participate in the voyage of the jewel this time. Who was this young man? Suddenly, the monk frowned. He raised his head and looked into the distance. There, a rumbling sound could be heard as one fighter jet after another sped toward them. Fighter jets? The monk was taken aback. He was not the only one. The Western superhumans were also stunned. Why are there fighter jets here? Which force sent them? The hearts of the Arcanists were filled with doubts. The fighter jets flew noisily across the sky. They approached at high speed. Many people on the ship were dumbfounded when they saw the fighter jets. Why would there be fighter jets here? Bufang also heard the rumbling sound. He looked up in confusion and saw the fighter jets that looked like big birds. Just when everyone was puzzled and surprised by the appearance of the fighter jets, suddenly, the fighter jet spat out a fiery snake, and countless sparks flew out at high speed. The flames were golden, accompanied by a violent noise. Tat, 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 tat. The sparks converged into a long golden dragon, heading straight for Bufang. Splash! Splash! The sea splashed. The bullets of the fighter jets rushed into the sea, causing countless splashes. Firearms! Firearms had joined the battle. Everyone on the ship was stunned. When the bullets hit the ship, they splashed and made a clanging sound. Everyone came back to their senses and screamed. Firearms represented death. People ran wildly. They no longer cared about taking pictures or anything like that. They ran crazily toward the interior of a ship. As long as they got inside, the bullets would not be able to hit them. The people on the cruise ship immediately hid themselves like ants in a panic. However, they were not the target of the fighter jets. They were not the target of the gunfire. Therefore, these people were unscathed after hiding. The ordinary people were all hiding. Only the superhumans were left on the ship. As a superhuman, they might not be able to resist firearms, but they could still avoid bullets. Moreover, they were not the target of the fighter jets. Xiao Ai's face turned pale. A moment later, she was filled with righteous indignation. Shameless Sakura Island country. They must have planned this. Yamada no Orochi, the Yamada no Orochi family, and now they're fighter jets. They are crazy. Xiao Ai stamped her feet angrily. Yuji's face was also grave, and there was a murderous look in his eyes. Chi cultivators had never had a good impression of Japan since ancient times. But now he could only hope that Senpai could deal with Yamada no Orochi under the influence of the fighter jets. Chi cultivators cultivated chi, so their bodies were very weak. It was not easy for them to resist firearms. If they had to divert their attention to resist firearms, they could easily fall into a passive position. Duh, 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 duh. Bullets shot out. They went straight toward Bufang. 5 fighter jets hovered around him and fired at him. The dense bullets almost drowned Bufang. Bufang frowned. His body shook slightly, and he dodged the bullets. Bufang was a little angry. There is no doubt that these fighter jets were also from the force that created Yamada no Orochi. Did they want to affect his ability to capture ingredients? The corners of Bufang's mouth curled into a cold sneer. Then he stepped into the air. Stepping on the seawater, he soared into the sky. He just stood there, and the bullets hit him. Bam! 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 Everyone's expression changed. Even an Earth immortal would be in great pain if he used his body to resist the bullets. Xiao Ai's pupils constricted, and her face turned pale. She had told Chief Luo about the news, but because they were at sea, the signal was not very good, and it would take some time for the transmission to arrive. What should they do? If Bufang was killed, Yamada no Orochi and Japan's fighter jets would change their target and target them. Suddenly, they froze. That was because Bufang, who was hit by the bullets, moved again. He was hit by the bullets, but he was unscathed. The seawater palm disappeared, and Yamada no Orochi fell back into the sea. It seemed to have received support, so it turned around and lunged at Bufang, biting him. This guy was going to fight back. Bufang was a little confused. Who gave Yamada no Orochi the confidence to fight back? One of the 3 greatest illusions in life. I can fight back. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Just these fighter jets? Bufang's eyes narrowed. He didn't take it seriously before, but this time, Bufang didn't want to hold back. Fighter jets? Today, he was going to have a good time. Flying a plane? He stepped on the seawater, and the waves exploded. The seawater caved in as if it had been hit by a violent force. Bam! Bufang shot up into the sky like a cannonball. He was heading toward the fighter jets. What the F***CK? The pilot's eyes shrank. He lifted the control stick, and the fighter jets swooped up. Bufang, on the other hand, was walking in the air, side by side with the fighter jets. The pilot hiding in the cockpit widened his eyes. Looking at Bufang outside, the corner of his mouth twitched. He quickly pressed the button. Boom! Waves of air rushed out of the fighter jets. In an instant, it accelerated to the extreme. Bufang looked at the fighter jets in the distance. He raised his fist. He threw a punch at the fighter jet from afar. This punch directly smashed the air into pieces. The shattered air turned into an invisible cannonball, flying toward the fighter jets. In a flash, it hit the fighter jets. The steel was dented, and the wings were broken. Boom! A dazzling explosion erupted in the sky. One of the fighter jets was blown up. The remaining 4 fighter jets also twisted their bodies, distancing themselves from Bufang. Yamada no Orochi roared, dashing out of the sea. Bufang glanced at him. His feet stomped hard, directly stepping on the snake's head. The giant snake was immediately stunned and was smashed back into the sea by the stomp. Who was he? Where was he? What was he doing? Yamada no Orochi was a little confused. Bufang clenched his fists, thrusting them in the air. He punched again and again. Each punch was compressed air, bursting out air bombs. The fighter jets were in the air. No matter how beautiful their flying skills were, it was useless. They were still beaten down by Bufang's punches. One after another, the fighter jets fell. However, the bullets from the fighter jets had no effect on Bufang's body. The pilot of the fighter jets almost went crazy. Was he still a human? All 5 fighter jets were shot down by Bufong. Crashing and exploding, Bufong fell from the sky. Yamada no Orochi had just popped out its head when it was stomped down. Yamada no Orochi was depressed, one by one. The snake heads rushed up. Bufong did not stand on ceremony either. With one slap, 6 of the remaining 7 heads were directly smashed by Bufong. In the end, only a bald head was left of Yamada no Orochi. Bufong raised one hand, his eyes sweeping over Yamada no Orochi. Suddenly, his eyes locked on a spot. The meat in this spot was the best. Bufong twitched the corner of his mouth. Yamada no Orochi trembled all over. He was a little scared and a little desperate. What kind of monster did he meet? Puff! A square piece of snake meat was grabbed by Bufong. Floating in the air, Yamada no Orochi howled miserably. His 8 tails suddenly rose and lashed at Bufong. This was his sure kill attack. Bufong's eyes narrowed, and there was some coldness surging in them. Divine senses erupted. Yamada no Orochi's 8 tails suddenly exploded. The remaining head of Yamada no Orochi was also full of fear. The oppression of divine senses made him feel a terrible pressure, as if it was torn from the depths of the universe. The human in front of him was definitely a monster. However, Yamada no Orochi knew that he could not escape today. But it did not matter that he could not escape. He still had a killing move. 8 tails exploded, but one of the tails did not explode into minced meat. Instead, it continued to lash at him. This was Yamada no Orochi's killing move. One of his 8 tails hid one of the 3 divine weapons. Heavenly Sword of Cumulus. This sword could kill a god. Go to hell. Damned human. Yamada no Orochi went crazy. Heavenly Sword of Cumulus, one of the 3 divine weapons of Sakura Island, also had a common name, Kusanagi Sword. Buzz's sword energy rose up. Bufong, who was looking at the snake meat in his hand, suddenly narrowed his eyes. He squinted slightly, and suddenly a ray of sword light came into his eyes. The madness of Yamada no Orochi made Bufong feel a little strange. Suddenly, Yamada no Orochi's madness came to an abrupt halt. His lantern-sized eyes widened even more, because the divine weapon Kusanagi sword was clamped by 2 fingers of Bufong. Chapter 1607. A depressing atmosphere pervaded the entire command room. Everyone stared at the screen in front of them, not daring to breathe loudly. 5 fighter jets were blown up. How incredible was it for a man to blow up 5 fighter jets? However, this kind of thing happened directly in front of them. It deeply stimulated their nerves. This is what happened after the recovery of spiritual energy. Firearms no longer rule. If we can't seize the spiritual energy ceiling point, we can't resist this kind of man. The general took a deep breath, then opened his eyes. His gaze made everyone shudder. Activate the warship missiles. Today, either that Huam man dies, or we die. The general slapped the table. This was the 3rd time he had slapped the table today. Perhaps it would be the last time. No one objected, and no one dared to object. Everyone fell silent. Then, the order was given. On the ship, gears roared, and the sound of creaking echoed through the air. The muzzle on the side of the ship slowly moved, then silently aimed at the direction of the jewel. It was a difficult decision to make. It showed that Sakura Island had completely fallen out with them. The general walked out of the command room. With his hands clasped behind his back, he stood at the top of the warship and looked at the moving muzzle. His heart twitched when he thought of the young man who had destroyed a fighter jet with one punch. What kind of man is that? I don't believe you can stop a missile. The general's eyes suddenly became ferocious. Inside the ship, people were preparing in an orderly manner. Flags were fluttering in the wind. Swish! The general held a military knife in his hand and was dressed in a well-ironed military uniform. He waved the knife and shouted loudly. He waved the saber and shouted, "Fire!" Boom! At this moment, the entire ship shook violently. A violent rumble rang out, and a terrible and blazing flame burst out of the muzzle of the cannon. Bang! Like a thunderclap, The entire ship trembled at this moment. Ripples appeared on the surface of the sea as airwaves scattered in all directions. With a deafening boom, flames soared into the sky. A missile soared into the sky, then aimed in the direction of the jewel, falling straight down from the sky. Its target was Bufong. Yamada no Orochi had lost all hope. The Kusanagi sword was a technique that he had been hiding all this time. It was his sure kill attack. However, he did not expect that his sure kill attack would be caught by the human in front of him with just 2 fingers. Why? This human, why was he so strong? Yamada no Orochi wanted to roar. Unfortunately, Bufong did not give him another chance. Crack! He exerted force with 2 fingers. Instantly, the Kusanagi sword was crushed by Bufong. The Kusanagi sword, one of the 3 divine weapons, broke into pieces. He fell into the vast sea. Bufong was really not interested in this kind of thing. He raised his hand and pointed at the last head of Yamada no Orochi. Bang! Yamada no Orochi was completely silent. Its head exploded and its body fell into the sea. It sank. Bufong looked indifferent. He was holding a huge piece of Orochi meat in his hand. This piece of meat was huge. If it was made into a snake soup, it would be enough to satisfy everyone present. Yamada no Orochi was dead. That was a mythical monster, but it was killed by the young man in front of him. Xiao Ai was dumbfounded. What kind of monster was with her? Yugo was very excited. He clenched his fists, waved them, and let out an excited roar. Awesome. Senior is really a senior. Yamada no Orochi. Such a behemoth was killed just like that. For some reason, he felt very happy. The corner of the monk's mouth twitched. However, he breathed a sigh of relief and felt his whole body relax. Without Yamada no Orochi, all of them would survive. The 2 superhumans from the west also slightly relaxed their tense bodies. However, before they could relax for too long, their bodies tensed up again. They raised their heads in disbelief and looked into the distance. Over there, something that looked like starlight was approaching at high speed. In the dark night, it was so bright and dazzling. What's that? Many people came out of the ship because they found that the battle seemed to be over and the fighter jets seemed to have been shot down. What happened today had a huge impact on ordinary people. It was far beyond their imagination. They came out with lingering fear, feeling as if they had survived a disaster. Everyone looked up at the sky. There, the light in the dark was getting closer and closer. It's so beautiful. Is that a shooting star? A shooting star? Why is it falling toward us? Heavens, what the hell is that? Why do I have a bad feeling? Many people on the ship cried out in surprise. Toot, toot! The siren of the jewel rang out, spreading in the dark night and stunning everyone. The monk's expression changed dramatically in an instant. Damn it, do those lunatics really want to die? That's a missile. Damn it, a missile. Those lunatics from Sakura Island. Despair filled the hearts of the superhumans. How could they not despair? They were superhumans, yes, but they were not gods. They were still humans. Once the missile exploded, the impact would be enough to kill all of them. It was one thing to send fighter jets, but to launch a missile. This was a life and death struggle. Once this matter spread, Sakura Island would definitely become the target of the whole world. Especially Hua. They would never forgive them so easily. A missile. Yugo was taken aback. Were those countries serious? How could Senpai make the people of Sakura Island so angry? How could they launch a missile regardless of the consequences? However, a moment later, his face turned unsightly, turning as red as a pig's liver. A missile? Isn't this nonsense? That thing was a weapon of war, a combat chicken among firearms and explosives. Once it landed, all of them would be wiped out. This was simply a lunatic. Yugo was a little dazed. He didn't know what to do. Even Senpai might not be able to stop a missile. An Earth immortal was also a human, and his body couldn't withstand a missile. Could it? After all, chi cultivators cultivated chi, not their bodies. How could they stop it? Or would all the people present, who had survived the disaster of Yamada no Orochi, be killed by a missile? Damn it, a bunch of bastards from Sakura Island. The monk was furious. Holding a piece of snake meat in his hand, Bufang tilted his head slightly and saw the missile flying toward them from the sky. Bufang's eyes narrowed slightly. A missile? Was it a missile among firearms and explosives? Bufang didn't have an accurate idea of what it was. However, Bufang was not stupid. He wouldn't bear the impact of such a missile for nothing. It would be tiring to bear a missile for nothing. When the missile whistled and smashed down, a huge pressure approached, causing many people to feel despair. Bufang's eyes narrowed slightly. His divine sense surged. His divine sense was suppressed, and it could only spread to a radius of 10 meters around him. However, it was enough. Bufang hovered in the air. Xiaopi and Little Hu lay on his shoulders, looking curiously at the falling missile. It was getting closer and closer. The jewel was filled with despair. On the Sakura Island ship, the general clenched his saber, his eyes bursting with madness. Suddenly, the general's pupils constricted. He wasn't the only one. Everyone on the warship went crazy. They found that the missile had stopped. For some reason, the missile, which was about to fall, had stopped. It didn't move forward and it didn't explode. What's going on? The officer roared and scolded the people around him. However, none of them could figure out why. At this moment, only the people on the jewel understood why the missile didn't explode. Because the missile didn't fall at all. How could it explode? It was 1 meter away from Bufang. The missile, which was the size of a man, hovered in the air. It was controlled by a supreme force hovering there. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back. His divine sense spread around his body, causing the missile to hover there as if it were still. Bufang raised his hand and gently touched the missile. Suddenly, the missile seemed to lose all its strength and fell vertically into the sea. With a splash, it sank to the bottom of the sea. That great crisis was solved just like that. The monk was dumbfounded. Everyone on the jewel was panting violently. Then, they burst into cheers of extreme excitement. Good heavens! Is that a miracle? Is that a miracle? It's so cool. I can't believe the missile is suspended in the air. He must be an immortal. He must be an immortal. People cheered excitedly. They had just escaped death, and some even wept with joy. Yugo burst out laughing. Senior is indeed the man I like. Xiao Ai wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with a smile. She almost thought she was going to die. It was over. It was finally over. In the distance, one helicopter after another spun its propellers and approached at high speed. Those were Hua's helicopters. The arrival of Hua's army meant that Sakura Island would not continue to attack them. If they attacked again, it would be tantamount to completely offending Hua. A small country like Sakura Island would not dare to do that. Bufang held the snake meat with one hand, his brows cold. Missile. Haha, interesting. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Little Hu, Bufang said. Lying on Bufang's shoulder, Little Hu's eyes lit up. He straightened up on Bufang's shoulder and put his little paw on Bufang's temple. They're provoking us with missiles. What should we do? Bufang rubbed Little Hu's head and said expressionlessly. Little Hu rolled his eyes. Then, he jumped off Bufang's shoulder and jumped into the distance. He leaped directly into the void. Buzz, everyone was taken aback. What was Bufang going to do? Bufang raised his hand and gently patted Little Hu's butt. Little Hu's eyes widened. Then, his little mouth began to swell and expand continuously. Many people were stunned. The people on the ship all looked over in confusion. What was that pet fox going to do? Burp. Little Hu opened his mouth and burped. The corner of everyone's mouth twitched. What was he doing? Was Little Hu here to act cute? Acting cute? The corners of Xiao Ai's and Yu Ji's mouths twitched. That was a 9-tailed fox, an S-class spirit beast. How could it be here to act cute? However, they had no idea what Bufang was going to do. Boom, boom. Suddenly, everyone's expression changed. He felt a terrible wave of energy sweeping across the ship. There seemed to be an invisible energy wave spreading. Little Hu's mouth began to emit a golden light. The light gradually spread Everyone was stunned because they smelled a fragrance. It was the fragrance of beef meatballs. This smell... Bam! Little Who opened his mouth. A beam of golden light burst out of his mouth. In an instant, it shot across the sky like a missile. There's a saying in Hua: courtesy demands reciprocity. I wish you good luck. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. After spitting out the explosive meatball, Little Who licked his lips excitedly. A whistling sound rang out. Everyone didn't understand what Bu Fong meant by reciprocity. Did he want to send a missile back to Sakura Island after it launched a missile? But did he think a spit from a pet fox would be a missile? Everyone didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It turned out that immortals also knew how to joke. On the Sakura Island ship, the officer was a little flustered and exasperated, cursing his men around him. He didn't understand how the missile failed and didn't even make a sound. Jin, what's that? Suddenly, one of his men pointed to the distant sky, where starlight was descending. The officer looked over. That thing was approaching at high speed, and a strong aroma of beef meatballs filled the air. The officer was dumbfounded. Beef meatballs! The people on the ship were also dumbfounded. What did it mean when a beef meatball fell from the sky? The beef meatball was not big, just the size of a normal beef meatball. Because it was too bright. Finally, the beef meatball fell, getting closer and closer. Looking at the beef meatball, the officer's heart suddenly palpitated. Why did the beef meatball give him the feeling that it was a missile? Finally, the beef meatball fell. It exploded in an instant. Chapter 1608. A meatball fell from the sky. No one had expected that. A meatball could fly, and it was flying over the sea. Did they think they were shooting a movie? The officers of Sakura Island were all stunned. However, while they were still in a daze, the meatball had fallen. No, it should be a meatball missile. It had fallen. The sound of an explosion rang out in an instant. Boom! The ship of Sakura Island exploded in an instant. The seawater surged up fiercely in an instant, and a huge mountain of seawater rolled up, bubbling. Boom! The flames rose to the sky in an instant, which was very obvious in the dark night. The whole sea seemed to shake and tremble. The place where the ship of Sakura Island had been turned into a huge whirlpool. As for the ship, it had long disappeared. The officers and all the soldiers of Sakura Island had disappeared before they could even react. Fortunately, no one saw this scene. If they had, their jaws would have dropped. Was this the destructive power of a meatball? Was it so terrible? It was as powerful as a nuclear bomb. The tremor was very strong. At least, the cruise ship, the Jewel, which was thousands of miles away, could feel it. Moreover, due to the trembling of the sea, huge waves were set off. As the seawater piled up, the waves swept in all directions and turned into huge waves. The waves kept approaching the Jewel. As they approached, the waves were already dozens of meters high. The crew of the Jewel had just breathed a sigh of relief, but now they felt like their hearts were in their throats again. The huge waves had a dangerous impact on a large ship like the Jewel. Once the ship was knocked down, it would be a nightmare for everyone. They had escaped the man-made disaster, but they could not escape the natural disaster. At this moment, Bu Fong had returned to the ship. He stood on the deck, his hair swaying in the wind. Bu Fong clasped his hands behind his back and held Little Who in his arms. Little Who's mouth was still smoking. Her little eyes were also looking into the distance. Over there, flames were faintly visible. The waves were also coming from that direction. Although Bu Fong's spiritual consciousness could not spread out to such a large range. But with Bu Fong's cultivation, he could clearly feel the position of the ship. Therefore, he patted Little Who's butt, aimed in the right direction, and delivered an explosive meatball. The other party had tried to assassinate him, sent him food ingredients, and even sent him fighter jets and missiles. Bu Fong felt that he would be letting down the other party's hospitality if he did not return the favor. So, he replied with a beef ball. May everything be all right. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. He held a piece of snake meat in one hand. This piece of snake meat was taken from the body of Yamada no Orochi. It was the most essential piece of meat of the snake. And Bufong was going to use this piece of snake meat to make a snake soup. At this moment, Yugu, Xiao AI, and all the people on the ship were looking at him with awe in their eyes. If he was not mistaken, Bufong should be an Earth Immortal among the Qi cultivators. Oh my God, an Earth Immortal was still an immortal. I can't believe such an existence actually appeared. The eyes of the superhumans from the West were extremely complicated. One helicopter after another landed on the ship. Among them, superhumans from Hua walked out. Chief Luo was among them. He did not see the previous battle, but by the time he arrived, it was already over. But from the shocked eyes of the people present, he could tell that the battle just now was not as simple as it seemed. Chief Luo took Xiao AI away. He needed some information. As for the crew, they were doing their best to deal with the coming waves. Everyone returned to their respective rooms. Of course, there were some other people on the deck. For example, Yugu, the monk, and the two Western superhumans. The monk came over with a complicated expression. There was no doubt that Bufong was stronger than him. The monk was an S-class superhuman, and Bufong was stronger than him. Only a Heaven Qi cultivator, or even an Earth Immortal, was stronger than him. According to the agreement, such an existence should not have appeared. Senior, Yuga looked at Bufong, who was still looking into the distance, and could not help but remind him. Bufong came to his senses and looked over in confusion. In the distance, the two Western superhumans were approaching. The mixed-race beauty's expression was somewhat complicated. She had tried to flirt with Bufong just now. No wonder she was flirted with instead. Bufong should be much stronger than her. May I know which immortal realm you are from? The monk approached Bufong, put his palms together respectfully, and bowed to Bufong. Strength spoke louder than words. Bufong was strong, so he had to show him the respect he deserved. In this era, the immortal realm that could produce Earth Immortals? Kunlun, Penglai? The kitchen, Bufong said with a straight face. The kitchen? The monk's face darkened. This senior really likes to joke. The kitchen? Do you think you're the kitchen god? Or the god of cooking? Hua said you would not interfere with this spiritual energy ceiling point. Are you going to openly violate the agreement? The two Western superhumans frowned. The mixed-race beauty stared straight at Bufong. She puffed out her chest, and her big eyes seemed to be able to speak. Spiritual energy ceiling point? I'm just passing by. I'm just going to take a look. I won't go in, Bufong said indifferently. As for the agreement you mentioned, I don't know. Bufong shook his head. He was not a Qi cultivator of Hua, so those contracts had nothing to do with him. Thank you, Senior. If it weren't for you, we would have been plotted against by those guys in Sakura Island. The monk hurried to smooth things over. The atmosphere eased a lot. Indeed, the situation just now was very dangerous. If it weren't for Bufong, the jewel might have been gone by now. Yamada no Orochi was a monster in Japanese mythology. It was not comparable to an Earth Immortal, but it was much stronger than an S-class superhuman. In the distance, waves rolled in. The wind howled. The strong wind blew, causing the clothes of the people present to flutter loudly. The mixed-race beauty's bright red dress swayed incessantly. Her straight and fair long legs were faintly discernible and extremely alluring. Bufong turned his head to look at the waves. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He patted Xiaopi on his shoulder. Xiaopi's straight compound eyes rolled. His body turned into a beam of golden light and shot out in an instant, streaking across the void, tearing the air apart, and landing in front of the waves. Yugu and the others were slightly stunned. What is Bufong going to do? The next moment, their pupils constricted. Mantis shrimp, which they had seen as ordinary and unremarkable in their eyes, actually displayed great power at that moment. The moment the monstrous wave approached Shrimpy, it split the wave in two. Bam. The seawater continued to fall. The jewel sailed leisurely through it. This strange scene stunned everyone on the ship. It was simply the means of an immortal, especially the ordinary people hiding in the cabin. At this moment, they all exclaimed and widened their eyes. Bam! After the jewel sailed past, The waves fell, heaven, overflowing waves were swept up, releasing rumbling sounds like thunder. However, the jewel was calm. The monk and the others were shocked. They had thought that the nine-tailed fox was already a very powerful spirit beast. However, the golden mantis shrimp on Bufang's shoulder seemed to be no weaker than the nine-tailed fox. Who the hell was this guy with such a powerful pet beast? All right, it's calm. Now can you tell me where the spiritual energy ceiling point is? Bufang turned and looked at the monk and the two Western superhumans. The monk's face froze. It seems that Bufang doesn't know the location of the spiritual energy ceiling point. That shouldn't be the case. If he doesn't know, why did he board the jewel? The sun rose over the sea. Just as Bufang was about to ask this question, the sky gradually brightened. The seawater was sparkling in the sunlight. A playful ray of sunlight leaped up from below the sea level, like a person who had covered his head with a quilt all night and suddenly poked half of his face out from under the quilt. The red rays of the morning sun shone on everyone's faces, making them look bright red. The monk looked at Bufang, and the two superhumans looked at Bufang. Do you know where we are now? Bufang frowned slightly. The monk hurriedly said, "We are now in the center of the South China Sea. The South China Sea has been called the home of immortals since ancient times. This time, the spiritual energy ceiling point is also located here, as if to prove this point." Of course, the monk and the others had used modern detection methods to determine the location of the spiritual energy ceiling point. Although cultivators still existed in this era, their numbers were far less than in ancient times. In this era where technology dominated, it was not shameful for cultivators to use technology. "Look!" Suddenly, Yugu exclaimed. Bufang and the others, who were chatting with each other, turned their heads and looked in the direction Yugo was pointing. Over there, the seawater seemed to be boiling. Dense mist constantly filled the air, rising and rushing into the clouds and the horizon, presenting the appearance of an immortal land. It was as if immortals were really shuttling through it. This is a phenomenon of heaven and earth. The monk's face was filled with excitement. The two Western superhumans were somewhat puzzled. Isn't this a mirage? That's not what a mirage looks like. We've arrived at the spiritual energy ceiling point. The monk was very excited. The jewel kept sailing. Finally, it came to a stop as it approached the sea filled with dense, immortal energy. Buzz, the jewel buzzed, and its whistle soared into the sky. A huge metal anchor was thrown into the sea and quickly sank to the bottom of the sea. With a thud, the jewel came to a halt. This is the spiritual energy ceiling point. I've seen it on the images transmitted back from a plane. Before we go in, we need to decide the top 5 of the World God of Cookery tournament. The monk said. Bufang was puzzled. Why they do that? The monk seemed to understand Bufang's doubts. He smiled and explained, there is a magic array in the spiritual energy ceiling point. It should be a magic array set up by the person who sealed the spiritual energy. It has the ability to transcend the heavens and the earth. However, after studying it for a long time, we discovered that to open the magic array, we need a certain opportunity, and that opportunity is the delicacy. Bufang arched his brows slightly. The artifact spirits were sleeping, but they still stirred up so many things. However, Bufang also understood that the artifact spirits might have set up such a setting to make it easier for him to find them. The artifact spirits were very considerate. Bufang was suddenly curious. Which artifact spirit was sleeping under the spiritual energy ceiling point? Was it Nicholas the handsome dragon, or Mulberry the vermilion bird, or the white tiger's roar, or the old black tortoise? For some reason, Bufang suddenly felt a little excited. The monk and the others turned around, preparing for the cooking competition. However, as soon as he turned around, he heard a swishing sound. In the blink of an eye, Bufang had already rushed out. He sped down from the jewel and landed on the sea. Stepping on the water, he walked step by step toward the mist with Little Hu in his arms. The monk and the two Western superhumans' faces darkened. The corner of Yuji's mouth twitched. "Senior, didn't you say you're just going to watch and not go in?" Chapter 1609. Just take a look and not go in? Of course, Bufong was just saying that casually. If this was really the place where the artifact spirits slept, there was no way Bufong wouldn't go in. After all, Bufong wanted to awaken all the artifact spirits and bring the God of Cooking set to its perfect state, so he had to go in. Stepping on the water and hovering above it, Bufong clasped his hands behind his back and walked on the waves. Waves splashed everywhere. Under the dumbfounded gazes of Tyrant and the Western paranormals, his figure gradually faded into the mist. Yuga didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He knew that Senior was not so easy to talk to. Even an Earth immortal would find it hard to resist such a fortuitous encounter. If it weren't for the fact that the top cultivators of various countries were holding each other back, they would have swarmed in by now. This spiritual energy ceiling point was related to the real recovery of spiritual energy, so no one dared to underestimate it. Then they saw Bufong enter. The two Western superhumans exchanged a glance and saw the solemn look in each other's eyes. The next moment, their appearances changed. The eyes of the blond man turned ghostly green, and a pair of bat-like wings emerged on his back. When the wings were spread, black demonic energy seemed to fill the air. His ears were pointed, and his teeth became very sharp. Western blood clan, a Western cultivator. The eyes of the mixed-race beauty narrowed as well. Then, a blue scepter appeared in her hand, which was inlaid with a gem. A Western magician. The two of them represented the Western superhumans in this competition, so they naturally wouldn't let Bufong ruin their operation. Even though Bufong was a Hua Chi cultivator who had killed Yamada no Orochi of Sakura Island, they wouldn't be afraid of him. Buzz and invisible energy spread out. The monk's expression changed instantly. So, you've already prepared a backup plan. The monk's face was livid. The vampire and the magician looked at each other, then smiled at each other. Grandmaster, please leave with the mortals on the jewel. Otherwise, if the aftermath of the battle destroys the ship, it won't be good if there are heavy casualties. The sharp impact in their words made the monk's face turn a little unsightly. There was no doubt that these were threats. The monk had no choice but to retreat. Yuga was also dumbfounded. He didn't expect things to develop like this. Chief Luo walked out of the jewel with a frown on his face. Behind him were many people from the Special Abilities Bureau. The mixed-race beauty holding the scepter saw Chief Luo and the others. A warm smile appeared on his face. Then, the scepter lightly tapped on the ship. Kacha. The deck of the jewel began to freeze at a speed visible to the naked eye. The speed at which the ice spread was extremely fast. In an instant, it covered the entire area, as if it wanted to freeze everyone present. In the distance, one fighter jet after another arrived at high speed. One by one, the fully armed Western paranormals landed on the ground. These were the Blood Tribe's troops. They jumped down from the fighter jets, and the red and black cloaks on their backs suddenly transformed into bat wings, carrying them in the air. A large mass of black gas was rapidly approaching. The knowledge of the mortals on the ship had long been subverted. When had they ever seen such a situation? Each and every one of them screamed in fright. Vampires! Vampires! Everyone was horrified. In addition to the vampires, there was also a group of magicians riding broomsticks among the fighter jets. These were the magicians of the West. Obviously, the Western superhumans were more prepared than Hua. They were even ready to fall out with each other. The monk's face was unsightly. Yuga frowned, too. The current situation was very clear. They were forced to retreat by the Western metahumans. Chief Luo clenched his fists, and his hand even fell on the pistol at his waist. Let's retreat. We've suffered a great loss this time because we were too honest, the monk said with a sigh. The Western paranormals burst into laughter. A group of black bats flew out and turned into vampires. Then they stepped into the cabin. Before long, a cry of horror rang out. Several chefs wearing chef robes were brought out of the cabin by them. These 5 chefs are the most qualified to compete for the top 5 in this world competition. Together with the 2 chefs we've prepared, that's enough. The leader of the vampires smiled wickedly. Then, they lifted their cloaks, turned into a swarm of black bats and flew toward the mist in the sea. The mixed-blood magician also floated up and flew into the mist on her broomstick. On the jewel, Grandmaster, are we just going to give up like this? Chief Luo was somewhat reluctant. So what if we don't give up? Should we go in and rob them? We can't do that. If we really provoke those vampires and magicians, we'll be the weaker side when a war breaks out. Besides, the monk sighed. Besides what? Chief Luo glared at him. Could it be that the superhumans of Hua had no choice but to swallow this loss? With a wry smile, the monk raised a hand and pointed above his head. Chief Luo froze, and the superhumans behind him also looked up. Their pupils constricted when they saw what was happening. Gurgle, gurgle. In the sky, a pool of blood that covered half of the sky drifted slowly. A terrible aura of death hung over everyone's heads. That's a top SS class superhuman of the West, the nobility of the vampires, comparable to the Earth Immortals of Hua. Dracula the Great Vampire. The monk took a deep breath. Standing next to Chief Luo, Xiao Ai's eyes were filled with disbelief. She looked at the computer in her arms, which was marked with many spiritual energy points. At this moment, the spiritual energy points above their heads were as big as ping-pong balls. What did that mean? This vampire was terrifying to the extreme. The great vampire, Dracula. Chief Luo was also in a daze. Of course, he knew about Dracula, the great vampire who was one of the strongest superhumans known in the superpower world. He could not believe that such an existence had appeared. So, do you think we can still participate in this? The monk said bitterly. If only the Earth Immortals of Hua were here. Fortunately, there was one in Hua. It was a pity that the Earth Immortals who killed Yamada no Orochi were not reliable. Look, someone exclaimed in the ship. The pool of blood floated into the dense mist, and behind it was a luxurious horse carriage. The chariot was a winged Pegasus with a single horn on its head. It was a sacred beast of the West. The chariot emitted a colorful glow, and a bell rang. Pulled by the Pegasus, it rushed into the spiritual energy ceiling point. Is it the Alps Grand Wizard? Chief Luo's pupils constricted again. Another top-tier arcanist. Sure enough, the spiritual energy ceiling point had attracted the attention of countless almighties. That would probably be extremely dangerous. Xiao Ai informed the headquarters of the Special Abilities Bureau and asked them to send more people here. It would be best if they could send an S-class superhuman. Chief Luo took a deep breath and said. Xiao Ai nodded quickly and began to fiddle with the computer. The jewel stopped in place. It did not dare to enter. Whoosh! Bufong stepped on the water and walked into it step by step. He narrowed his eyes, very curious. His divine sense spread out. It became very active at this moment, as if it had sensed a familiar aura. Walala, the water under his feet suddenly boiled. Bufong froze. In the distance, shark fins emerged one after another. Boom! 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 The water exploded, and one ferocious shark after another leaped out of it, opening their mouths full of sharp teeth at Bufong. Shark, he furrowed his brows. This was a place where spiritual energy gathered, so it must have attracted countless marine creatures. Bufong paid no attention to the sharks that leaped out of the water. At this moment, Xiaopi, lying on Bufong's shoulder, straightened its upper body and rolled its compound eyes. Then it sped out and hovered in front of Bufong. Suddenly, it let out a roar. It was a strange roar. It was not loud, but it sounded like a docile kitten roaring in front of Tiger. However, this contrast scared the giant shark so much that it shivered, and it crashed into the sea. Then it swayed its fins and sped away. As the shrimp ancestor, Xiaopi was the overlord of marine creatures, so it naturally had its own power. Shrimpy seemed to be a little proud of itself as it waved its little legs on Bufong's shoulder. Bufong did not care. The appearance of the shark was just a small interlude. He continued to step on the water. The South Sea was a land of immortals, and Bufong did not know much about it. In ancient Chinese legends, many immortals lived in the South Sea. However, at that time, the spiritual energy in the South Sea had not disappeared, and it was still a land of immortals. Now, the spiritual energy had long been exhausted. However, as Bufong approached, he felt the majestic spiritual energy sweeping over. It was as if he was at the center of a typhoon. Bufong raised his eyebrows slightly. He took a step forward. Suddenly, the water boiled. Boom! With Bufong's body as the center, a spot of light spread out. Soon, it turned into a huge array. In an instant, the array covered an area of hundreds of miles. Bufong stood on the array as if he was walking on flat ground. This as Bufong was startled, looking around. Rumble inside the array. Suddenly, a rumbling sound rang out. Then, the water parted, as if a giant creature was slowly floating up from the water. Rumble. Bufong frowned as he looked at the huge bronze door that slowly rose from the bottom of the sea. Yes, it was a bronze door. There were many patterns drawn on the bronze door. Bufong focused his eyes on them. Bufong actually recognized all the patterns. Looking at those patterns, the corner of Bufong's mouth couldn't help but twitch. On that pattern, there was a bird. A bird spread its wings and flew high in the sky. The bird turned into a woman, and the woman curled up in an egg hidden behind the door and slept. That bird looked so much like a vermilion bird. Could it be that the one sleeping here was a vermilion bird? However, that was not the end of the pattern. The woman had turned into an egg and had fallen into a deep slumber. However, the egg was blocking a formation, and behind that formation were densely packed, ugly people drawn in a crooked manner. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they were all drawn in a hideous manner. What was this pattern trying to express? Bufong furrowed his brows. Could it be that there were more secrets behind the sleeping artifact spirit? Just as Bufong was pondering, boom, in the distance a terrible rumble rang out. The sea was surging. Sharks rushed out of the water, pouncing on the invading vampires and sorcerers. These sharks were also mutated creatures. They could be considered spirit beasts. They fought hard against the vampires and sorcerers. Some vampires were bitten to death, and some sorcerers were bitten to death. Of course, there were also many sharks that fell into the sea. Blood soaked this part of the sea in an instant. The fresh blood drifted over and slowly flowed into the formation. It caused the array to turn scarlet. Boom! A pool of blood flew over, hovering in the air. When the pool of blood dispersed, a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes in a swallow-tailed coat appeared. The man's face was pale, and his eyes turned to Bufong. His eyes narrowed, and there seemed to be traces of blood energy spreading out from them. Ring, ring, ring. The Pegasus pulled the carriage over. 7 colored light sprinkled down. It was a riot of colors. A terrible aura instantly filled the air. It made the seawater boil uneasily. Chapter 16:10. On the surface of the South Sea. An old man wearing a bamboo hat and a straw raincoat was propping the boat up with a long bamboo pole in his hand. Although it was just a small boat, every time the old man's bamboo pole fell, the boat would shoot forward like a rocket. It was like a speedboat, splashing water and shooting forward at high speed. The rumbling sound kept ringing out. The water behind the boat seemed to be churning. It drew a straight line on the surface of the sea as it sped along. Huge waves swept across the sea, turning into a wall of waves that seemed to suppress everything. As the boat sailed past, the old man grabbed the bamboo pole and threw it at the huge wall of waves in front of him, which was dozens of meters high. The cut was very smooth. However, the old man continued on his way, as if he had done something trivial. After a while, the outline of the jewel slowly appeared in front of him. Bufong looked up in confusion. He looked at the handsome figure floating in the pool of blood, then at the carriage pulled by the horse. His expression did not change in the slightest. In addition to these 2 auras, Bufong could sense that there were many other auras spying on him. This caused Bufong's brows to furrow slightly. Didn't the Hua man say that he would not participate in this operation? Why is there a Hua man here? The handsome man played with his fingers and glanced at Bufong. His eyes seemed to be filled with blood. "Ha! Count Dracula, long time no see. How have you been?" A creak rang out. The door of the carriage was pushed open. The carriage had a strong style of the Central European century. From inside, a red-faced old man with white hair and a white beard, wrapped in a big green robe, walked out with a smile. The old man was holding a withered branch in his hand. He looked at the handsome man with a smile. "Oh, His Holiness the Great Wizard is here, too," the handsome man said with a faint smile. His every frown and smile seemed to exude the ultimate charm. "I can't help it. The spiritual energy ceiling point is such an important place. How can I not come? If I don't come, I won't be able to hold on any longer," the old man said with a smile. Dracula curled his lips. "You said the same thing 100 years ago. Liar." Bufong looked up at the sky, at the two who were talking to each other. The density of the spiritual energy on their bodies was very strong, even stronger than that of the Yamada and no Orochi that he had killed previously. It seemed like he was a person with special abilities from Earth, but they should all be from the West. According to Yugo, the top cultivators on Earth had discovered the 4 spiritual energy ceiling points and were going to create a complete spiritual energy revival. These 2 people should be among the top cultivators. If he had the time, he could ask the 2 of them where the remaining 3 spiritual energy ceiling points were. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. However, the most important thing now was to wake up the vermilion bird. According to the pattern, there should be an egg behind the bronze door, and the vermilion bird was sleeping in the egg. Wait, the vermilion bird in the pattern had transformed into a woman. Could it be that the vermilion bird had transformed? Bufong was suddenly very curious about the appearance of the artifact spirit. Dracula glanced at Bufong and suddenly grinned hideously. "Your Holiness the Great Wizard, do you and I want to work together and expel this Hua man? Since the Hua people did not participate in this operation, let us Western forces completely occupy this spiritual energy ceiling point." Dracula's proposal was very tempting. At least, the group of vampires behind him was already a little impatient. "Hee, if you want to do it, you could do it yourself, my lord. I can't do it myself." The Great Wizard chuckled. Dracula curled his lips and gave up. That was because he felt threatened by Bufong's aura. This was the instinct of vampires. When they encountered a powerful existence, they would unconsciously feel threatened. This Hua man was not ordinary. However, he was not stupid to fight with the Hua man until both sides suffered heavy losses. "Dracula?" Bufong looked up and suddenly gave the handsome man a puzzled look. He had heard the conversation between the vampire and the Great Wizard. The vampire glanced indifferently at Bufong. "Do you have a brother named Nicholas?" The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. He could not help but think of Nicholas the handsome dragon. What a lunatic! Dracula rolled his eyes. The next moment, Bufong reached out his hand and pushed the bronze door. A creak rang out. Bufong pushed the bronze door open. Then, Bufong took Little Hu and Xiaopi into the door and closed it again. Dracula and the Great Wizard narrowed their eyes and followed after him. A group of people also pushed the bronze door open. After entering the bronze door, they found themselves in a chaotic place. Dracula narrowed his eyes and called out to the people behind him. Immediately, a few vampires escorted a few chefs to him. "Cook well. If you can open the array, I'll grant you immortality." Dracula's lips curled up into a gentle smile. The chefs' bodies trembled, and they were terrified. Immortality for vampires? Wouldn't that mean they would be assimilated into vampires? Could they choose to refuse? They were inside the array, and this was also the most critical step. The experts of various countries had studied it for a long time, and the final conclusion was that they had to cook a dish that could trigger the array before they could enter. Bufong stood quietly at the side. "That Hua man did not prepare a chef. I'm afraid he has to wait for us to open the array before he can enter. Your Holiness, are you really not going to join forces with me to kill this Hua man?" Dracula glanced at Bufong, who was deep in thought in the distance, and said to the Great Wizard, full of temptation, "Ha! Hua people are not to be trifled with, so I won't get involved. The great wizard was firm in his stance. Dracula had no choice but to glare at the chefs and signal them to cook. The 5 chefs trembled as they stood in front of the array, their bodies shaking like a sieve. This World God of Cookery tournament is AF asterisk king trap. I can't even pay with my life. Where's the promised prize of 100 million yuan? Where's the mysterious gift? They came to this godforsaken place and had to cook with the air? Why did they have to become vampires if they couldn't cook well? Was it so difficult to be a chef these days? The chefs complained in their hearts, but they did not dare to relax their hands. They quickly used their best cooking skills to cook. After all, if they wanted to live, they had to cook well. Dracula was very satisfied with his power. He liked it when these people were afraid of him. Suddenly, the Huan man in the distance also moved. The Huan man took out a huge piece of meat. Meat? What kind of meat is that? Why does it contain such strong spiritual energy? Bufong seemed to ignore Dracula and the great wizard. He moved his hand. Bufong took out kitchen utensils from the system's storage space. These were very ordinary kitchen utensils, which Bufong had prepared for cooking. After placing the snake meat on the stove, Bufong grabbed a blue kitchen knife. It was a good knife, but Bufong felt a little rough when using it. The dragonbone kitchen knife was the most comfortable. He peeled off the skin and bones of the Yamada no Orochi's meat. Then, Bufong's hand was covered with a layer of spiritual energy, and he began to process the snake meat. He shredded the snake meat. After cleaning it, Bufong heated the wok with oil, poured the clean snake meat into it, and stir-fried it. Bufong grabbed the wok and tossed it smoothly. Every time the wok collided with the stove, it seemed to explode. The sound was deafening. In the distance, both Count Dracula and the great wizard were dumbfounded. This Huan man is cooking by himself? Is this Qi cultivator a chef? This is interesting. It smells a little good. What kind of meat is he cooking? Both of them were bewildered. After stir-frying the snake meat for a while, he poured in the gravy and began to boil it into a snake broth. After it was cooked, he added the seasoning. Taking out the purple bamboo steamer, Bufong put the snake broth into the steamer and steamed it for a while. As the bamboo steamer steamed, it glowed with light. It was quite magical. Both Dracula and the great wizard were very curious. They wanted to know what Bufong was cooking. Of course, they certainly did not know what Bufong was cooking. Bufong would not tell them. Bufong did not expect the artifact spirit to be so arrogant that he needed to cook a dish to wake it up. Fortunately, he had just killed an Yamada no Orochi, which happened to be a good ingredient. He took out the snake broth and took out the shredded snake meat. A fire was burning in the black wok. There was a thick soup boiling inside, which contained shredded meat mixed with egg white and starch, as well as some other ingredients from the system's dimensional bag, which were cut into shreds and cooked together. The broth was boiling. It seemed that because of the addition of starch, it was a little viscous. Bufong poured the snake meat into it, seasoned it, boiled it for a few minutes, and then took it out of the wok. Clatter! A bowl of thick broth was ladled into a blue and white porcelain bowl. The shredded snake meat, chicken, and other ingredients formed this snake broth. The surface of the bowl was sparkling and seemed to be sparkling. The overflowing aroma seemed to spread from the bowl in circles. Bufong took a deep breath, feeling a little intoxicated by it. He had never made snake broth before. Yamada no Orochi was a mythical monster, so its meat should not be too bad. The aroma of Bufong's dish spread. Dracula and the great wizard looked at each other. This Qi cultivator really made AF asterisk king good dish. Just by smelling the aroma in the air, it seemed extraordinary. The two of them looked at each other and saw the astonishment in each other's eyes. Bufong paid no attention to them. Instead, he rubbed his hands and picked up a bowl of snake broth. What? Aren't you going to let the array spirit have a taste first? Dracula and the great wizard were confused again. Didn't you cook to break the array? Why are you eating it yourself? Both of them were somewhat speechless. However, the aroma in the air was too strong. It was the aroma of meat, a different kind of meat. It seemed to go deep into their stomachs and stir their stomachs. That kind of feeling really made it difficult for them to control their bodies. Slurp. Bufong held the snake broth and scooped a spoonful with a blue and white porcelain spoon. The broth was slightly viscous, and there was a layer of gelatinous juice on the spoon. Bufong blew on it and then poured it into his mouth. Slurp. The snake meat was tender and fragrant. As soon as it entered his mouth, it went straight to his stomach. Bufong raised his eyebrows. This taste is not bad, Bufong thought to himself. Bufong glanced at the rotating array in front of him. Bufong seemed to see the huge egg floating behind it. That egg seemed to be longing for the snake broth in Bufong's hand. However, Bufong didn't pay any attention to it. He was slurping up the food, feeling extremely happy. The chefs in the distance were also attracted by the aroma and looked sideways. They were amazed. As they smelled the aroma in the air, they felt a sense of defeat. Just by smelling the aroma, they knew that they had lost. Smelling the aroma of Bufong's dishes, they felt that the dishes they cooked had become tasteless. Dracula and the Great Wizard had a bad feeling. Then, they looked at each other and approached Bufong. It smelled so good. The closer they got, the more they craved it. The beard of the white-haired, white-bearded Great Wizard in a green robe trembled. Mysterious Chi cultivator from the east, what kind of meat are you cooking? The Great Wizard asked with a smile, his tone very polite. Slurp. Bufong drank a spoonful of snake broth. The snake meat melted in his mouth, making him feel a little comfortable. Snake meat? Do you know Yamada no Orochi from Sakura Island? It's the meat of that thing. The snake broth is very good, but the grade of the snake meat is still a little low. Otherwise, this snake broth would be more delicious. Bufong smacked his lips, feeling a little regretful. Yamada no Orochi? Dracula and the Great Wizard froze, their faces stiff. What did this young man say? What snake? Yamada no Orochi? That was an SS-class spirit beast. Chapter 16:11. The meat of Yamada no Orochi? Why don't you say it's the meat of an ancient divine dragon? Count Dracula and the Great Wizard did not know whether to laugh or cry. Are Huaxia people so good at bragging nowadays? It's said that Huaxia people are honest, but it seems that it's all bullshit now. What was Yamada no Orochi? It was an SS-class spirit beast, a monster in the mythology of Sakura Island, with the power to destroy heaven and earth. Even if they fought it, it would not be easy for them to kill it, let alone take a piece of its meat. Not to mention ripping off a piece of flesh. For a monster like this, it would definitely value its own body very much. How could it easily give up its body to others? However, as they sniffed the fragrance in the air, Dracula and the Great Wizard felt a pang of hunger. Delicious food was very tempting to them, especially the Great Wizard. This was especially true for the Great Magister. Although he was old, his only hobby was to eat. He had eaten everything on earth that could be eaten. As a wizard, he could only feel pleasure from eating and the continuation of his life. In the distance, the chefs captured by the vampires were still cooking hard. They needed to do their best to cook perfectly. Only in this way could they be chosen and keep their lives. However, the fragrance in the air made them lose their grip on the kitchen knives in their hands. As they sniffed the fragrance, they were shocked. What kind of dish is this? Can such a fragrant dish really be made in the world? Honorable Hua friends, I'm Count Dracula. May I have a taste of your delicacy? Both Count Dracula and the Great Wizard expressed their desire to have a taste of it. The main reason was that the dish was too fragrant. With a slurp, Bufong swallowed the snake soup in the small bowl. As the piping hot snake soup entered Bufong's stomach, he felt a warm current surging within him. Glancing at them, the corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. This is snake soup made with the meat of Yamada no Orochi. Do you dare to eat it? Count Dracula and the Great Wizard rolled their eyes at the same time. You make it sound as if it's true. How could a creature like Yamada no Orochi die? The spiritual energy ceiling point had not been completely opened, and its evolution had not reached its peak. SS-class spirit beasts could be regarded as the top spirit beasts on Earth. So how could they die so easily? They thought that Bufong was lying to them. Rumble suddenly. Count Dracula and the Great Wizard were stunned, because the array in front of Bufong began to spin. Bufong's bowl of snake soup on the array gradually disappeared, as if it was being tasted by the array. The formation responded immediately. Rumble, the formation rumbled and immediately began to revolve, the energy inside leaking out. The thin film that had enveloped him immediately began to slowly dissipate. Buzz, at this moment, both Dracula and the Great Wizard tensed up physically and mentally. They stared at the dispersing membrane array formation. Behind the array formation should be the good stuff in the spiritual energy sealing point. How could there be no good things in a spirit chi spot that gathered a quarter of the earth spirit chi? This was the consensus of all the cultivators on earth. They did not believe that so much spiritual chi could not be brewed into a treasure after countless years. Their eyes were fixed on the formation. Bufong, on the other hand, was very calm. He was still drinking the snake soup. It had to be said that the slightly sticky delicacy of the snake soup was very much to Bufong's liking. Rumble, the sea seemed to begin to tremble. The tremors spread out, causing the seawater to churn and surge. Outside the dense mist, the jewel kept bobbing up and down under the tremor. Chief Luo, the monk, and the others on the ship all sucked in cold breaths. It's begun. The spiritual energy sealing point is about to be opened. Chief Luo and the monk exchange a glance. They were both shocked and inexplicably excited. Bam! Bam! Suddenly, their hearts trembled. They looked down and saw a ring of invisible energy spreading out from under the jewel. Then, a huge shadow appeared and covered the enormous body of the jewel. There was a behemoth under the sea. The monk and the others were terrified. In the distance, a small boat was approaching at high speed. The bamboo pole struck the surface of the sea, making the boat look as if it was flying. An old man in a straw raincoat and a bamboo hat flew out of the boat, stepped into the air, and landed on the jewel. Buzz, up in the sky, a beam of sword light sliced through everything as it sped through the air. With a murderous intent, it charged straight into the spiritual energy sealing point. The monk and the others felt a chill run down their spines. The god of Sakura Island, Susanoo? The old man wearing the bamboo hat let out a soft cry of surprise. Patriarch! When Yuga saw the old man in the bamboo hat, he cried out in surprise and knelt on the ground. The old man, dressed in plain clothes and wearing a bamboo hat, was the patriarch of the immortal island of Penglai, a true earth immortal. He was a real immortal. Why is patriarch here? Yuga asked excitedly. The immortal patriarch was his lifelong idol. How could he not be excited to see his idol? Although Senior Bufong was also very strong, in Yu Ji's eyes, only the patriarch of the immortal island of Penglai was his idol. The spiritual energy sealing point that occupies a quarter of Earth is about to be opened. How can I not come? Besides, Yamada no Orochi in that remote Sakura Island has broken rules, so I don't have to follow them, the old man chuckled. Then, he touched Yu Ji's head. It's dangerous here. Go back quickly. Gods from all over the world will be here in a moment, and the shockwaves of the war are not something you could stop, the old man said. The monk and Yu Ji's hearts skipped a beat, and they nodded. Chief Luo looked at the spiritual energy sealing point. Although he was reluctant, he knew that he was still too weak before the real, almighty experts on Earth. Don't worry. As long as I'm here, this spiritual energy sealing point belongs to Hua. Patriarch Penglai chuckled. Then he floated up into the air and kicked the tip of the jewel with the tip of his foot. In an instant, with a rumble, the jewel shot forward, broke through the waves, and sped into the distance. The old man, clad in a straw raincoat and a bamboo hat, stepped on a white cloud and sped toward the misty spiritual energy sealing point. An immortal! He's really an immortal. Good heavens! So there really are immortals in this world. I've finally learned something new. Are you stupid? Wasn't the man who killed the serpent yesterday an immortal as well? Countless people on the jewel exclaimed. They were so excited that their faces were flushed after witnessing such a mythical event with their own eyes. However, the jewel was getting farther and farther away from the spiritual energy ceiling point. It hovered in the distance, bobbing up and down. It was already very far from the location of the spiritual energy ceiling point. Yugu, the monk, and the others did not intend to leave, so they just waited here. The opening of the spiritual energy ceiling point, which occupied a quarter of Earth's spiritual energy, was absolutely extraordinary. It was also a kind of luck for them to witness such a miracle. Buzz, Dracula's eyes, turned scarlet, and sharp teeth grew out of his mouth. He was very excited. There it was. Finally, the treasure in the spiritual energy point had appeared. The Grand Magister held the withered tree branch magic staff, her face red with excitement. The dense mist dissipated. The scene inside was revealed. Both of them widened their eyes. Bufong, on the other hand, was slurping the snake soup. A patch of pure white appeared in front of them. In the end, its true form was revealed. It was actually a huge egg that was as tall as two people. Egg? How could it be an egg? Dracula and the great wizard were dumbfounded. Could it be the legendary dragon egg? No. Both of them carefully looked at each other, and then their pupils shrank. Behind the egg, there was a piece of clothing floating. That's right, it was a set of clothes. It was red and white, and its sleeves fluttered in the wind, making it seem like a phoenix spreading its wings and soaring into the sky. It emanated boundless charm and immortal energy, and it was extremely lifelike. Baby, Dracula bellowed. A set of clothes that appeared in this spiritual chi point was definitely not ordinary clothes. That was definitely a treasure, perhaps even a legendary divine artifact. Dracula was excited. This time, he was too lazy to pay attention to Bufong. He flew directly toward the clothes. He had to get his hands on those clothes. Bufong, who was eating the snake's soup, paused for a moment, and a slightly surprised look came over his face. Is that the vermilion robe? The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. With a thought, he sank into his spirit's sea, only to realize that the vermilion robe in his spirit's sea had disappeared without him noticing. With a buzz, the vermilion robe fluttered. There seemed to be a divine light flowing over it. The spiritual chi kept rushing into the vermilion robe. After being filtered by the vermilion robe, the spiritual chi flowed back. It seemed to form a perfect cycle. Slurp! The appearance of the vermilion robe made Bufong even more excited. There was no doubt that he was getting closer and closer to awakening Mulberry. Rumble! The vampire Dracula let out a shrill cry. An invisible sound wave came out of his mouth, which exploded and caused the waves to rise as if they were about to roll back. His body turned into an extremely huge bat, and he sped toward the vermilion robe. As for the egg, he ignored it. In his eyes, treasures were much more important than eggs. The great wizard's eyes narrowed. The staff in his hand trembled violently, and he murmured something under his breath. But a bolt of lightning shot out of the staff and shot toward Dracula in the distance. Crackle! Dracula immediately changed back from his bat form, and he was forced back a few steps by the lightning. Damn you, old man. You're courting death. Dracula growled. He opened his mouth, and his sharp teeth seemed to become more and more terrifying. He raised his hand and waved it violently. In an instant, countless bats flew toward the great wizard. The great magister's withered staff lit up once again, and a huge fireball appeared in front of him. The fireballs were densely packed, and like meteors, they flew towards the swarm of bats and collided with each other. Countless bats screamed and turned into black smoke before dissipating. Count Dracula's pupils constricted, and his hair seemed to stand on end. He raised his hand, and blood gushed out of his palm. Then, more and more blood flowed out of his palm, turning into a huge pool of blood that swirled rapidly in the void. Boom! The pool of blood turned into a whirlpool and shrouded the great wizard, enveloping him and Bufong within. Bufong drank the snake's soup and looked curiously at the pool of blood around him. This was the power of the strange people on Earth, and it was very strange. Bufong could see that magicians controlled the elements of heaven and earth, and they could manipulate them to fight. The energy of the kindred came from the strange power in their bloodline. The two had different origins, but they both had extraordinary fighting prowess. Bufong was suddenly a little curious. How did Earth come to have so many strange cultivation methods? These methods would eventually become the only way to study cosmic energy. But it was amazing that a planet like Earth could give birth to so many different cultivation methods. Perhaps this was also one of Earth's secrets. The pool of blood had trapped the Great Wizard. Meanwhile, Dracula was approaching the vermilion robe at full speed. Bufong finished the last mouthful of snake soup. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. After eating and drinking, it was time to move around. He was just worrying about having no clothes to wear when the vermilion robe appeared. As for a vampire, Bufong was eager to see it. Unfortunately, vampires can't be used as food like Yamada no Orochi. Bufong curled his lips and muttered. The Great Wizard, who was also in the pool of blood, widened his eyes and gave Bufong a strange look. Dracula was much stronger than Yamada no Orochi, and he still wanted to eat a vampire? Bufong nodded at the Great Wizard, who was stunned. The next moment, he was about to make a move. However, just as Bufong was about to make a move, a sharp sword energy seemed to cut through the air and slashed at him from outside the pool of blood, intending to kill him. How dare you kill Yamada no Orochi? Man, give me your life. A cold voice rang out. Then, a sword fell from the sky like dawn. Bufong frowned. The Great Wizard's expression changed. First, he was shocked by the sword energy, and then, as if he had thought of something incredible, he turned to look at Bufong. Could it be that the meat in the soup just now was really the meat of Yamada no Orochi? Chapter 16:12. A sharp sword energy fell from the sky, carrying with it a suffocating killing intent. This killing intent was surging and surging violently. The Great Wizard's hair stood on end, and his eyes narrowed. Bufong, on the other hand, frowned and looked up in confusion. Who was it that had such a strong, killing intent toward him? From the other's words, he could tell that the other had come for the revenge of Yamada no Orochi. In the distance, Count Dracula of the Blood Clan narrowed his eyes. Are they fighting? If so, I can get this treasure wholeheartedly. Could this suit of clothes be a defensive treasure? The corner of the vampire's mouth twitched. Vampires had an excellent recovery ability, but he could never have too many defensive treasures. With that in mind, Dracula focused his eyes on the robe behind the huge egg. The robe, which seemed to be shrouded in immortal energy, made his heart burn with eagerness. Judging by the appearance of this robe, could it be a treasure left behind by an ancient Hua immortal? A treasure that could condense a quarter of the earth? An immortal king? Or a treasure left behind by an immortal emperor? Dracula's eyes burned with eagerness. In front of an immortal king and an immortal emperor, he was nothing. But if he could get this treasure, he might be able to rise to the top. Bufong raised his head and looked at the sword energy that was shooting down. That wisp of sword energy fell straight down. Bufong raised his hand and slapped it with his palm. However, the sword chi easily crumbled inch by inch. Bufong was taken aback. He had made such a big noise, but the power of the sword energy was just this? It didn't make sense. Bufong felt that the power in the sword energy was too weak. The Great Wizard also widened his eyes. Impossible. That voice just now belonged to the god of Sakura Island, Susanoo. He is an existence comparable to an earth immortal of Hua. How could that sword energy be so weak? The Great Wizard was old, but he was knowledgeable, so he was naturally puzzled. Bufong was also puzzled. When the sword energy dissipated, the so-called Susanoo did not appear at all. Boom! However, an even thicker sword light swept over. Dracula, who was close to the vermilion robe, was instantly stabbed by the sword light. With a bang, his body suddenly exploded, Countless rays of blood shot out. Count Dracula let out a miserable howl and instantly moved sideways. In the void, a dark purple figure emerged. It was a Sakura Island samurai wearing armor and holding a samurai sword. His sword had seriously injured Count Dracula. The wound was bleeding profusely, and it was difficult to heal. Susanoo, despicable and shameless trash of Sakura Island, to actually sneak attack this count. Dracula was furious. He had thought that Susanoo was targeting Bufong and the Grand Sorcerer, but it turned out that Susanoo's real target was him. No, it should be said that their true target was the immortal robe. Dressed in armor, Susanoo's face couldn't be seen clearly, but his eyes were cold. He had forced Dracula back, and at this moment, he occupied the position closest to the vermilion robe. Billowing spiritual energy kept swirling around the vermilion robe, making it even more elegant. You're a vampire. What do you want this immortal robe for? It was left behind by the god of Sakura Island. Susanoo said coldly. Dracula's eyes were full of killing intent. Shameless. In the distance, the great wizard pointed his staff at the blood pool, causing it to explode. Then, he and Bufong broke free. The four of them immediately hovered in midair. The chefs who had been abducted by the vampires were already trembling with fear. When immortals fought, mortals suffered. Even if there were superhumans among them, in front of Dracula and Susanoo, they were just ordinary people. They wanted to flee, but their bodies were extremely cold. Gurgle. Suddenly, the sea began to churn. Susanoo sneered, turned, crossed the egg, and grabbed at the vermilion robe. How could he lose the treasure in the spiritual energy sealing point? Dracula's lips had turned dark purple, and his ears had become sharp. He was so furious that he roared. Boom! The sea exploded. A huge black shadow suddenly rose from the sea. It opened its huge mouth and bit at the vermilion robe. As soon as the giant beast appeared, Bufong's eyes lit up. The expressions of the people around him changed dramatically. This is a giant whale. The great mage's body trembled as he took a deep breath. His flowery green robe trembled incessantly. That's Poseidon, the god of sea. Boom! Susanoo roared and slashed down with the katana in his hand. A terrifying sword light suddenly appeared in the sky and tore down. The giant whale was forced back, and his figure was also sent flying far away. The katana in his hand was knocked away and fell into the distance. My sword of 10 punches. Susanoo's eyes narrowed. He turned to look at the giant whale. There, the whale was floating on the surface of the sea. Water droplets kept gathering over its head, and soon they turned into a figure. It was a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes. His muscles were bulging, and he was wearing gold and silver. His earlobes were adorned with huge round earrings, and he had a wicked smile on his face. It's rare for the sea to be so lively. How can I, Poseidon, be absent? The man burst out laughing. With a shake of his hand, a trident appeared in his hand. The trident was golden in color, and it looked resplendent and magnificent. The god of sea? A curious look came over Bufong's face. He was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he watched with great interest. The god of sea's aura was very strong, the strongest among all the existences present. It was even stronger than Susanoo's aura. The one who tried to kill him before should be Susanoo. The god of Sakura Island and the master of Yamata, no, Orochi? Bufong raised his eyebrows. Bufong did not have a good impression of the people of Sakura Island or the god of gods. It was best that the other party did not provoke him. Boom! Boom! All of a sudden, Poseidon's eyes narrowed as he looked into the distance. There a figure, clad in a straw raincoat and a bamboo hat, drifted over on an auspicious cloud. An earth immortal of Hua. Poseidon said solemnly. A vigilant look came over Susanoo's face. More and more experts were coming, which meant that the competition for treasures was getting fiercer. Patriarch Penglai hovered in midair on an auspicious cloud. He glanced indifferently at Bufong first, as if he was surprised that a Hua man was here. Then his eyes fell on the vermilion robe. I can sense it. That robe has the aura of a Hua man. Patriarch Peng Lai said with a smile, holding a bamboo pole in his hand. Bah! Each one is more shameless than the other. Treasures belong to the virtuous, and whoever has the ability can take them. Count Dracula's eyes were cold. The next moment, he turned into a pool of blood and sped toward the vermilion robe. Susanoo reached out his hand, and the 10-fist sword in the distance trembled. With a buzzing sound, it shot toward him at high speed and fell into his hand. He narrowed his eyes and glanced around, but he did not make a move. The great wizard chuckled and retreated with a ruddy face. He was a magician with powerful offensive means, but his fleshly body was too weak. He was not stupid to fight with these barbarians. He needed to keep a distance. He glanced at Bufong. Little friend, you'd better pray for yourself. Be careful not to die in front of so many gods. If you can survive, I'd like to taste your cooking. The great wizard chuckled. Then he waved his staff, and a shield emerged around him. A gust of wind blew over, and the great wizard floated into the distance. Patriarch Peng Lai glanced at Bufong, but he quickly looked away. In the distance, Count Dracula was approaching the vermilion robe at full speed. He was even about to reach out his hand. You're too impatient, Poseidon shook his head. Then he grabbed the trident with one hand and pointed it in Dracula's direction. Boom! A column of water rushed up from the sea. As it rose, it kept condensing, trying to freeze Dracula's blood pool. Count Dracula reverted to his human form in a flash. Then he reached out his claws. Countless bats flew out of his sleeves and bit at the ice column. The sound of explosions kept ringing out. Susanoo made his move. With a slash of his knife, one half-moon slash after another flew toward Count Dracula. Damn it, you Sakura Island trash. Do I have a grudge against you? Count Dracula's eyes were turning red. Susanoo had played tricks on him again and again. Count Dracula waved his hand. Immediately, a spinning blood pool flew out and collided with the knife energy. Boom! An explosion rang out, and blood splattered in all directions. Count Dracula staggered. Besieged by Poseidon and Susanoo, the god of the sea, Count Dracula felt that the life of a vampire was shrouded in darkness. In the distance, Patriarch Peng Lai smiled faintly. His eyes narrowed under the bamboo hat. The next moment, with a shake of his hand, he grabbed the bamboo pole and threw it out. Then, he pulled out a shadow and slapped it hard on Dracula. Plumes of black smoke came out of his body. Count Dracula was so angry that he went mad. Then, he turned into a huge bloodbath and sped into the distance. The four Earth Immortals were engaged in a fierce battle in an instant. In a flash, the battle had entered a white-hot stage. Rumbling filled the air, and terrible fluctuations shook heaven and earth. Outside, one after another, huge waves rushed out of the spiritual energy ceiling point. They slapped the surface of the sea, causing the water to surge. Even though the jewel had sailed far away, it could still feel the turbulence, which made one's hair stand on end. This is a battle between gods. Chief Luo swallowed. He could imagine how terrible the battle in the spiritual energy ceiling point was. Umeba, that battle is no longer something that we can interfere in. I wonder how Senior is doing. Could he have been beaten to death? Hugo had a bold guess in his mind. However, when he thought of how mysterious Bufong was, he still felt that the possibility of Bufong being killed was very small. At this moment, Bufong, looking at the battle, the corner of his mouth twitched. He landed. Stepping on the waves, he walked step by step toward the vermilion robe. His pace was neither fast nor slow. The waves rocked, and his body rose and fell with them. He looked like a foam floating on the surface of the sea. Swoosh! Bufong lifted his foot, stepped up from the sea, and went straight up. Finally, he came in front of the vermilion robe. He glanced over his shoulder at the four men who were fighting fiercely. Bufong twitched the corner of his mouth. He reached out a hand and grabbed the vermilion robe. The moment he touched the vermilion robe, Count Dracula, Poseidon, the great wizard, and Susanoo all sensed it. They jerked their heads around and looked over. Swoosh! The sleeves of the vermilion robe fluttered noisily as it streaked across the sky. With a swoosh, an arm stretched out of the sleeve. It was neatly put on Buffon's body. The vermilion robe seemed to be cheering. Its feathers automatically wrapped around Buffon, and the belt automatically tied into a beautiful bow. The striped red and white vermilion robe was perfectly worn by Buffon. Count Dracula and the others were stunned. The next moment, their eyes turned red. "Let go of that treasure," Count Dracula roared. Patriarch Punglai had a strange expression on his face. He grabbed the bamboo pole and did not know what to say. Poseidon, on the other hand, frowned. The killing intent in Susanoo's eyes grew stronger. Holding the Tatsuka sword, he thrust it straight toward Buffon. The Tatsuka sword surged with sword light. "I can settle old and new grudges at the same time. You killed me, Yamada no Orochi, and now you want to take my precious immortal robe? You, go to hell." As he approached Buffon, Susanoo let out a long roar. Susanoo roared, gripped the sword with both hands, and swung it upward at Buffon. Boom! Boom! The water exploded in an instant, and a sword energy that seemed to cut the whole sea in half went straight toward Buffon. "Your immortal robe?" Buffon rubbed his head and loosened his grip. His short hair transformed into long hair that hung down to his waist and fluttered in the wind. He squinted at Susanoo and twitched the corner of his mouth. "You're really shameless. Your immortal robe?" "No, it's my chef's robe." Chapter 16:13. "This is my chef's robe," Buffon's calm voice rang out. Everyone present was slightly taken aback. "A chef's robe? That's an immortal robe. It's not a chef's robe." Susanoo sneered. His sword energy soared and shot toward Buffon, intending to cut Buffon in half. As the god of Sakura Island, his strength was comparable to that of an earth immortal of Hua, and his fighting prowess was extraordinary. This guy who stole the immortal robe must die. He would settle old and new grudges together. He had arranged for Yamada no Orochi to follow the jewel and wait for the right time. However, when he received the news, the great snake was killed. The man who killed Yamada no Orochi was none other than this young man in front of him. Buffon glanced indifferently at Susanoo. The sword energy streaked across the sky as if to cut the sea in half. Its power was very terrible. Stepping on the void, Buffon hovered in midair. He clasped his hands behind his back, his face calm. The sword energy came shooting toward him. Then Buffon raised his hand, which was as translucent as jade, and threw it out quietly. As the sword energy approached, it stirred up a gust of wind. When Buffon's palm hit it, the sword energy exploded inch by inch. The surrounding sea exploded, causing the seawater to churn continuously. "Die!" Susanoo approached at high speed. The ten-fist sword slashed down toward Buffon's neck, intending to cut Buffon's head off. In the distance, everyone had different expressions. Count Dracula, on the other hand, sneered. He was in the most sorry state at the moment. After all, he was besieged by 3 people, and it was not easy for him to bear. But he was still upset that Buffon had taken the immortal robe. He felt inexplicably pleased to see Buffon killed. Poseidon's expression did not change. The great wizard sighed. Susanoo was an earth immortal, and Buffon might not be able to withstand the power of his sword. Patriarch Punglai frowned as well. Finally, he sighed. So many top cultivators did not make a move to snatch the immortal robe, but Buffon was the first to grab it. Buffon had brought this upon himself. As far as they were concerned, Buffon would definitely die. From the looks of it, this Chinese man had some fighting power and even killed Yamada no Orochi. However, Susanoo was much stronger than Yamada no Orochi. Rip! The air exploded, and a sword slashed down, heading straight for Buffon. Buffon's eyes narrowed. Then he flipped his hand. Suddenly, he grabbed the 10-fist sword that was slashing at him. The atmosphere froze in an instant. This is caught? Susanu's eyes also narrowed. He seemed to be in disbelief. The Tatsukin sword was extremely sharp and could cut through iron like mud. It was a godly sword like the Kusanagi sword. How could it be caught with one hand? Susanu's eyes turned ferocious. I told you, it's my chef robe. Bufang's eyes were indifferent as he said coldly. The next moment, he exerted strength in his hand. Crack! Susanu's pupils constricted to the size of a mung bean. Fine cracks densely covered the sword and continued to spread. In an instant, the cracks had covered the entire sword. Clang! Finally, under Bufang's great strength, the Tatsukin sword exploded. Bufang crushed it with his bare hands, turning it into broken pieces that filled the air. Bufang's face was expressionless. The broken pieces of the Tatsukin sword flew past. Susanu's face could not be seen clearly, but his fear could be seen. In the distance, the crowd was shocked as well. Dracula's schadenfreude came to an abrupt halt. Patriarch Punglai's eyes lit up. Poseidon, the god of sea, gave a soft cry of surprise as if he did not expect things to turn out this way. How is this possible? The debris seemed to have become very slow, which made Susanu feel a little frightened. Rumble! Susanu exploded in an instant and retreated to the distance. He stared warily at Bufang. He only knew that Bufang had killed Yamada no Orochi, but he did not know Bufang's real strength. Who is this young man? Is there such a young earth immortal among the Hua Chi cultivators? Patriarch Punglai was puzzled. Everyone was puzzled by Bufang's identity. Bufang crushed the Tatsukin sword as if he had done something insignificant. He patted the vermilion robe and smoothed out the creases. The next moment, Bufang walked towards Susanu step by step. Bufang rose into the air. He approached a high speed. Soon, he was in front of Susanu. The vermilion robe was taken away by Bufang. Suddenly, the reversed flow of spiritual chi surged into the huge egg. No one noticed that the egg seemed to have begun to emit a radiance. Susanu had lost the Tatsukin sword, but he did not want to give up. He clenched his fist and threw a punch at Bufang. As a god, he had rich fighting skills. Even without the Tatsukin sword, his fighting prowess was still outstanding. However, facing Susanu, Bufang did not dodge at all. Instead, he met him head-on. Susanu threw out a punch, and Bufang threw out a punch as well. Bam! Their fists collided. The armor on Susanu's arm burst into pieces as if it had been minced into pieces, scattering all over the ground. His body staggered backward, and his expression changed drastically. Bufang threw another punch, and Susanu could only raise his fist to fight back. Bam! With another punch, Susanu's armor shattered once more. Bufang did not have a good impression of Susanu to begin with, so he kept attacking. Susanu was beaten to a sorry state, as if he was a drowning dog. Bufang did not pay attention to any skills in fighting. He simply crushed Susanu. He felt as if he had been pinned to the ground and beaten hard. Count Dracula could no longer laugh. It turns out that this chef has been pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. If he can suppress Susanu, does that mean he can suppress me as well? The people of Hua are really despicable. They said they won't fight for the spiritual energy seal, but they actually sent 2 Earth Immortals to fight for it. Susanu was a little angry. He was a god, and he had never suffered such a loss. He raised his head, and his eyes burst with a red color. Bufang reached out a hand and grabbed Susanu's helmet. Then, he exerted force with his fingers. Susanu roared furiously. His helmet exploded, and he retreated at top speed. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Then, he swung his hands at his waist, and the vermilion robe fluttered behind him. Then Bufang raised his leg and kicked Susanu in the chest. Rumble! Susanu's armor completely shattered, revealing the wretched figure inside. It was a middle-aged man. He coughed out a mouthful of blood as he flew backward at high speed. Then, he flew out of the spiritual energy seal. He flew thousands of miles away. His legs stepped on the surface of the sea, continuously raising huge waves. He wanted to stop his body, but he couldn't do it. Bam, 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 bam. He could not stop himself, and his body tumbled in the sea like a ball. On the jewel, the monk, Yugu, and the others were dumbfounded. They did not expect that someone would fly out of the spiritual energy seal. That terrifying aura made their hearts tremble. Swoosh, Susanoo steadied himself, blood dripping from his mouth, and a serious look in his eyes. Meanwhile, on the jewel, Chief Luo and the others were already dumbfounded. Xiao AI grabbed the computer, which showed that the spiritual energy point of the man who was kicked out was as big as a ping-pong ball, almost covering half of the computer screen. This showed that the strength of the man who was kicked out was extremely terrifying. A Hua man, Susanoo's eyes burst with cold, killing intent. He glanced over his shoulder at the jewel. Then, he grinned and wiped the blood from his mouth. He raised his hand. Rumble. A stream of dark purple energy fell from the sky. The jewel shook violently, and all the people in the cabin were thrown out involuntarily. Susanoo's body was covered with a layer of dark purple energy. The dark purple energy spread out, as if it had turned into silk threads, binding the figures one by one. Without exception, all of them were Hua men. Damn you! Susanoo's eyes were cold. Susanoo's eyes were ice cold. The immortal robe is mine. It's all mine. For a moment, the atmosphere was somewhat quiet and strange. The fact that Susanoo was knocked flying away by Bu Fong with such ease was a huge blow to their worldview. Bu Fong, however, did not take it seriously. The vermilion robe he was wearing gave Bu Fong a sense of ease and fulfillment. Spiritual energy swirled around him as if it was scouring Bu Fong's body. Speaking of scouring spiritual energy, Bu Fong jerked his head around to look. There, without the vermilion robe, spiritual energy was pouring into the huge egg. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes. If his guess was right, Mulberry, the vermilion bird's artifact spirit, is sleeping in this huge egg. Is it going to wake up? Bu Fong suddenly felt a little excited. The awakening of the artifact spirit meant that the god of cooking set was approaching perfection. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly as he looked forward to it. Crack. After a large amount of spiritual energy was poured into the egg, a fine crack appeared on the eggshell. As soon as it appeared, it seemed to attract everyone's attention. Poseidon, Count Dracula, and the others also noticed the huge egg. They were so attracted by the immortal robe that they had forgotten about this mysterious egg. Could it be that this egg is also a treasure? Or rather, what kind of creature was being bred in this giant egg? Count Dracula was excited once again. It turned into a pool of blood and flew towards the huge egg, wanting to snatch it away. Poseidon was a little tempted as well. However, they were all watching from the sidelines. Patriarch Punlai, on the other hand, looked much more serious. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bu Fong stood in midair. He stared at the cracks on the eggshell, which kept spreading. The pool of blood approached with a strange cry. Bu Fong furrowed his brows and lightly punched the blood pool. It's useless. Physical attacks are ineffective against my blood pool. Count Dracula was having a good time. Physical attacks were ineffective against him. However, Bu Fong's punch landed on the pool of blood. Count Dracula felt his heart skip a beat. The next moment, he was pulled out of the pool of blood. A loud bang rang out. Count Dracula was sent flying backward. Half of his eye was swollen and bruised. How? How is this possible? At that moment, Count Dracula felt a supreme power, and he could not help but withdraw from the state of the blood pool. Why you? Let's attack together. This guy has snatched the immortal robe, and now he wants to take the egg for himself. How can we tolerate this? Count Dracula stomped his feet in anger. Poseidon did not hesitate any longer. He struck at once. It was one thing for the immortal robe to be taken away by Bu Fong, but the fact that the egg could cause spiritual energy to flow backward was enough to show that it was extraordinary. Naturally, he could not let the egg be taken away. He swung the trident in Bu Fong's direction. Seawater surged into the sky. Bam! The giant whale leaped out of the sea, opened its mouth, and swooped at Bufong. The whale, which was even larger than the jewel, leaped out of the sea. It was a very shocking and visually impactful sight. The great wizard sighed softly. Holding the staff, his hair and beard fluttered as he waved it in the air and recited an incantation. Buzz, then, he pointed the staff in Bufong's direction. In an instant, seawater rolled up and condensed into a huge water giant. Each of the giant's hands held a giant hammer. Together with the giant whale, they hammered at Bufong. Patriarch Penglai narrowed his eyes. Although Bufong was a Hua man, he did not want to give up such an opportunity. With a flip of his hand, he slapped the bamboo pole. The pole immediately shot out, whistling through the air toward Bufong. For a moment, the attacks of 3 Earth Immortals arrived. Crack! The cracks on the eggshell widened again. Bufong raised his eyebrows slightly. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Hovering in midair, his back facing the giant whale, the water giant, and the bamboo pole, in the distance Sisanu approached with a ferocious look on his face. Figures were struggling on the dark purple energy, and his eyes were filled with madness. However, in the face of so many attacks, Bufong was still unmoved. Bufong just stared at the huge egg. Spiritual energy flowed backward, and the egg was spinning. Finally, the egg broke. The eggshell peeled off, revealing a hole, bam! Inside the broken eggshell, a fair and slender arm stretched out from it. The eggshell split apart. At last, the creature inside the eggshell was completely revealed in front of Bufong. Scarlet flames spread out from the egg. It was as if the sky was burning red. A sea of fire enveloped Bufong. Then, a graceful figure slowly walked out of the sea of fire. The naked figure of a woman slowly walked out. Looking at the naked woman, Bufong's spirit sea began to boil in an instant. Chapter 16:14. Only Bufong could see the naked figure. It was a woman. She was stark naked and fair as she walked out of the flames. Her fiery red hair spread out, and her face was extremely beautiful. There was grace, elegance, and even a hint of arrogance on her face. This woman's beauty was like a blazing flame, like a hand clutching one's throat. As the woman approached, it became more and more suffocating, more and more alluring. The scarlet flames were flowing around like birds that were fluttering in the air. The flame lingered around the woman's body, covering the private parts of her beautiful, jade-like body. However, it was precisely this that made the woman even more alluring. The soles of her feet were fair and sparkling, as if they were made of milky white jade that had been carefully polished. The woman came out of the eggshell, walking out of the flame. She seemed to represent the raging flame, the flame that could burn everything. Time seemed to have come to a standstill at this moment. Bufong, wearing the vermilion robe, looked indifferently at the woman who had broken out of the eggshell and was walking slowly in the distance. Fusong, the vermilion bird? Bufong was bewildered, a little suspicious in his heart. This was because this was different from the vermilion bird in his memory. In Bufong's memory, the vermilion bird seemed to be a careless, masculine woman. Didn't you see how violent she was when she was possessed? However, the vermilion bird in front of him was like a fairy in a painting, a beauty who had walked out of a painting. Her beauty was indescribable, and her nobility could not be blasphemed. The woman's naked body was covered in flames, causing the private parts of her body to be faintly discernible. However, it was precisely because of this that this woman became even more charming and attractive. Bufong furrowed his brows. That woman had come close to Bufong. The woman stretched out her jade-like arm, placing it on Bufong's shoulder. The woman was not as tall as Bufong. Her slender hand was slightly curled, as if she wanted to stroke Bufong's face. What? Bufong frowned. The woman's palm was as hot as fire. When it came into contact with his skin, it felt like it was going to burn his skin. Bufong felt the woman's hand touching his cheek. It was as hot as charcoal that had just been taken out of the fire. What was the vermilion bird doing? Bufong didn't do anything else. He just looked at the woman indifferently. He wanted to see how seductive she was going to be. The woman was like a beautiful snake coiling around Bufong's body. It was as if she wanted to climb onto Bufong's body. Her waist felt like it was weightless and could be grasped. It seemed that Bufong's indifference had provoked the woman. The woman's beautiful face even pounced toward Bufong's face. It's about time. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. He stretched out his hand and placed it on the latter's face. The woman was stunned. In the next moment, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. It was a proud will that belonged to the king of birds. He wanted to suppress Bufong with his body. No, he furrowed his brows. You're not Fusong, Bufong said coldly. He thought that this woman was the vermilion bird. But in fact, this woman was not the vermilion bird. However, Bufong's spirit sea was boiling. It seemed to be boiling because of this woman's appearance. This woman is Fusong. But she's not the Fusong you know. The Cheelant's lazy voice resounded in Bufong's mind. Bufong's eyes focused. The woman's hands were already on Bufong's shoulders. Flames twined around them. Her fiery red hair was burning like fire. Her flaming red lips parted and touched Bufong's face. Bufong tiptoed. With a bang, the ground suddenly exploded. Bufong's figure instantly retreated. However, the woman's soft and weightless waist was approaching. It was as if she wanted to knead herself into Bufong's body. There seemed to be some anger in Bufong's eyes. This woman was not Fusong. Or rather, this was the vermilion bird's sleeping will on earth. What Bufong needed to do was to conquer this will. The other artifact spirits were probably the same. He needed to conquer them himself. In his spirit sea, the true form of his divine sense, which had been sitting cross-legged on the god of cooking's menu, suddenly opened its eyes. The beam of golden light seemed to shoot out of his eyes. It turned into two golden ribbons and shot out of Bufong's eyes. Bufong reached out, grabbed the ribbons, and threw them out. The ribbons seemed to have a mind of their own. They spun rapidly and wrapped around the woman's body. They were tightly bound. I told you. It's about time. Bufong twitched his mouth and said, boom. The giant whale was enormous, and its body pressed down like a towering mountain. It was even larger than the 100,000-ton jewel, and the pressure it brought to people was terrifying. As it leaped out of the sea, the airwaves generated by it howled like a hurricane. Poseidon and the others exclaimed in surprise. This was because they discovered that Bufong, who was below them, was suddenly covered by a mass of scarlet flames, and it was connected to the mysterious egg. Was the treasure in the spiritual energy sealing point going to be taken away by this Hua man? Poseidon could not tolerate this. He had gone through so much trouble to come to the South Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. Was he going to return empty-handed? No, absolutely not. Ephesus, swallow him. Poseidon, the god of the sea, let out a roar. Behind him, monstrous waves rose into the sky. He was the overlord of the sea, the god of the sea. The giant whale's eyes narrowed. It opened its mouth, and a jet of water spewed out of its nostrils. Its huge mouth was like a huge sky curtain covering everything. All of a sudden, amid the fire, a beam of golden light shot out. The god of the sea, Poseidon, naturally noticed it. The main thing was that the golden light was too obvious. Buzz, squeak, 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 a golden mantis shrimp appeared, hovering in front of the giant whale, waving its claws at it. Mantis shrimp, the corner of Poseidon's mouth twitched. He was unperturbed, and he even wanted to laugh. A mantis shrimp was showing off in front of the giant whale? Was this a joke? Mantis shrimp was at the bottom of the ocean, in front of the SS-class spirit beast Ephesus that he had tamed personally. It was even weaker than an ant. The giant whale opened its mouth. It did not even see Xiaopi. Compared to the giant whale, Xiaopi was like an ant waving its claws in front of a mountain. If one did not look closely, they would not even see it. The giant whale's mouth fell. Suddenly, dazzling golden light shot into the sky. The giant whale was stunned. His huge eyeballs rolled and fell on the mantis shrimp in front of him. The mantis shrimp turned into a beam of golden light and shot out, hitting the surface of the giant whale. Puff! The giant whale, which had been indifferent all this while, suddenly let out a bestial roar. Boom! The giant whale, which had leaped into the sky, fell directly into the sea, stirring up the water. Huge waves rose to the sky. Poseidon was dumbstruck. Holding the trident, he couldn't believe it. What's going on? Ephesus! Ephesus! Answer me! Poseidon furrowed his brows. However, the giant whale's response was a wave of terror. It was as if it was facing a top existence. Damn it. You're the overlord of the ocean. What are you afraid of? Of mantis shrimp? As a giant whale, how could it be so useless? Poseidon was furious. The giant whale fled. With a flick of its tail, it jumped out of the sea and sank back into the water. With a shake, it disappeared. Puff! In the sea, a golden mantis shrimp popped its head, swimming leisurely in the sea. Rumble! The seawater poured down like a storm. The giant seawater giant wielded two giant hammers made of seawater, smashing toward Buffon. Even the air seemed to have been crushed by the pressure. Boom! All of a sudden, the flame that shrouded Buffon suddenly dispersed. The great sorcerer Poseidon and the others watched with rapt attention. There, the flame disappeared, revealing Buffon and a red-haired woman in a bathrobe. That woman was charming and beautiful, like a goddess in the legends. Of course, that wasn't the focus of their attention. It was... Who was that woman? Buffon had bound that woman. Frowning, looking at the giant seawater giant wielding two giant hammers. Facing the giant hammers, Buffon reached out his arm. Boom! The giant hammers smashed down. Viciously, they hit Buffon's palm. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The entire sea churned, invisible waves of air scattered. The magic that the great sorcerer could cast could even be at the forbidden level. Without a doubt, this seawater giant was a forbidden level spell. At least, this spell completely drained the great sorcerer's magic power. All of a sudden, the great sorcerer's eyes shrank. His green robe trembled. Because he was shocked to find his forbidden spell, the seawater giant was slowly shaking. A streak of silver light, like a small silver snake, drilled out of Buffon's palm. It drilled into the seawater giant's body. The moment it drilled in, the seawater giant began to evaporate. Slowly, it completely evaporated. Just for a moment, the seawater giant was turned into water vapor, disappearing without a trace. At this moment, the great sorcerer saw it clearly. That small silver snake was not a small snake. Instead, it was a silver flame. That flame fell into Buffon's palm, quietly burning. Looking at that flame, the great sorcerer felt a strong sense of death. It was as if that flame was enough to kill him. Only now did the great sorcerer realize how terrifying Buffon was. Swoosh! A bamboo pole shot toward him from a distance. Vibrating at a high frequency, it kept approaching Buffon. Buffon narrowed his eyes. The moment the bamboo pole approached his body, a cracking sound was heard, and it broke into pieces, turning into densely packed and fine bamboo strands. Each of them was shrouded in immortal energy, exuding supreme terror. Patriarch Punglai's means were absolutely amazing. Buffon was not in the mood to play with these people now. He felt a headache coming on, looking at the charming woman who kept struggling beside him. For a moment, he was confused. She was indeed a sleeping artifact spirit, but judging from her appearance, she did not seem to be Mulberry. Instead, she was another meaning of Mulberry. According to Qilin, what he needed to do was to conquer the artifact spirit. But Patriarch Punglai focused his eyes. He seemed to be in disbelief, because the bamboo threads, which kept approaching, were hovering in the air in front of Buffon, unable to get any closer. This move frightened Patriarch Punglai. Tied up by the divine sense threads, Vermilion Bird struggled. The flames could not burn these divine sense threads, so she felt a little wronged. Blinking her big eyes, she stared at Bufang. She whimpered, feeling a little wronged. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Big sister, you're on my side, his divine sense trembled. The hovering bamboo threads instantly lost control. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Only then did Patriarch Peng Lai breathe a sigh of relief. This is more like it. If this Hua boy can control my attack without doing anything, what cultivation base does he have? A human immortal? Or a heaven immortal? Bam! Bam! All the bamboo threads that stabbed into Bufang's body broke. But Patriarch Peng Lai did not care. After all, Bufang was wearing an immortal robe, which had an invincible defense. It seems that this boy's strength is about the same as mine. When did such a genius appear in Hua? Is he a genius from Kunlun? Patriarch Peng Lai's eyes flickered. Compared to him, the genius from the immortal island of Peng Lai was really useless. Senior, Patriarch, help! Just when Patriarch Peng Lai was thinking in the distance, a miserable shriek like that of a pig being slaughtered rang out. Yuji's shriek rang out across the sea. Both Bufang and Patriarch Peng Lai paused and turned to look. There, shrouded in dark purple energy, Susanoo had imprisoned all the Hua people on the jewel and was approaching them step by step on the waves. Chapter 16:15. Yuji's scream rang out like a pig being slaughtered. Many people were taken aback. Dracula was taken aback. So was Poseidon, while the great wizard and Patriarch Peng Lai looked over with a frown. Bufang frowned and glanced into the distance. There, he saw Susanoo walking over on the waves. He was barefooted, and his armor was tattered. He walked on the waves, but he looked very sharp. Dark purple energy surged, trapping many Hua people. What is this guy doing? Dracula could not help but ask, twitching the corner of his mouth. Susanoo's behavior confused him. Is he going to use these mortals to threaten Bufang by capturing so many Hua people? How could he do something so disgusting? Although Poseidon was very displeased with Bufang, Susanoo's behavior made him even more displeased. They were gods in myths and legends, and they were the gods in the eyes of mortals. Attacking mortals was tantamount to throwing their status as gods to the ground and trampling on them. Perhaps only a god from Sakura Island like Susanoo could be so unscrupulous. Bound by Bufang's stripe, Vermilion Bird could only struggle and cry, trying to stimulate Bufang's soft heart with sympathy. However, Bufang was not in the mood to pay attention to him. Bufang turned his eyes and rested them on Susanoo. The monk, Chief Luo, Xiao Ai, Yugu, and the others were all bound by Susanoo. Like tentacles, the dark purple energy wrapped around their necks. He could crush their necks and kill them at any time. Hand over the treasure, or else all these Hua people will die, Susanoo said coldly, his eyes flashing with a dark purple light. A threat. This was a blatant threat. Bufang's strength was beyond their expectation. The collision of brute force had thrown Susanoo thousands of miles away. Even Susanoo was a little shocked by this power. Without a doubt, Bufang should be an earth-level deity of China, and an extraordinary one at that. In terms of raw power, Susanoo might not be as strong as Bufang, but strength was far from being the key to success. Susanoo smirked. The great magister was so angry that his beard was bulging. This kind of behavior was shameful to them. As a god, Susanoo was really shameless to do such a thing. The top cultivators all had an unspoken rule, which was not to attack mortals. Once they attacked mortals, wouldn't the world be in chaos? Patriarch Peng Lai snorted angrily. As a Hua citizen and Yu Ji's patriarch, how could he allow Susanoo to act so presumptuously? Patriarch Peng Lai thought to himself. Immediately, he patted his waist, and several flying swords flew out of his spatial pouch. The bronze immortal sword glinted with an immortal light as it shot towards Susanoo in the distance. Susanoo suddenly turned his head and looked at the flying sword that was shooting towards him. "How dare you?" Susanoo said coldly. The flying swords were only dozens of meters away from him. However, the next moment, the dark purple tentacles behind Susanoo exploded with power. Bam! A man who was entangled by the tentacles was squeezed and coughed up a mouthful of blood. If he continued to exert force, the Hua citizen might even be crushed to death. The power of a god was indeed not something mortals could resist. But the flying sword stopped. They did not move forward. Patriarch Peng Lai was furious, but he did not have the strength to do so. He was indeed stronger than Susanoo, but there was a limit to his strength. It was impossible for him to save so many people in a short time. Fear of harming the innocent was exactly what he was feeling right now. Susanoo ignored Patriarch Peng Lai. His ice-cold gaze locked onto Bufang, and there was a faint killing intent swirling within it. Yu Ji's face was pale. They were not the only ones. Chief Luo, Xiao Ai, and the others looked ashen. Sitting cross-legged with his palms put together and eyes closed, he was chanting Amit Ba. He was the calmest of them all. After all, it was difficult to stay calm when death was approaching. Hand over the immortal robe, or all these people will die. Susanoo was very pleased with himself. This trick was too practical. These so-called gods always had mercy in their hearts, which was the mercy they had for mortals. By seizing their mercy and making a big deal out of it, they would always reap the ultimate benefit. Bufang frowned and looked coldly at Susanoo in the distance. He looked coldly at Susanoo in the distance. This kind of behavior is really despicable. Let them go, Bufang said faintly. You want to save them? Then hand over the immortal robe. It belongs to me. Susanoo sneered. I'm not negotiating with you. I'll give you 3 seconds to think about it, and let them go. Bufang said expressionlessly. Is he crazy? Patriarch Peng Lai, Count Dracula, and the others were somewhat confused. What is Bufang trying to do? Why is he threatening me instead? Senior, don't be like this. Be tactful. Yu Ji's heart trembled. He felt as if a knife was hanging over his head, and Susanoo could take his life with just a thought. Bufang doesn't want to provoke Susanoo anymore. Susanoo was taken aback for a moment. Then he chuckled. How dare you threaten me? The expression on Susanoo's face became ferocious in an instant. Then I'll make a bet first. Susanoo let out a long roar. The tentacle was about to crush a man's throat in an instant. Bufang focused his eyes. In a flash, he moved. Bufang had lost his patience with Susanoo. Boom! The water under his feet exploded. In the blink of an eye, Bufang appeared in front of Susanoo as if he had teleported. At that moment, everyone was in a trance. Even Susanoo did not expect that. At this moment, the dark purple tentacle had not yet crushed the man's throat. Boom! Susanoo's vision blurred. He only felt a strong arm suddenly grabbing his neck. So fast. Poseidon, the great wizard, and the others all sucked in their breaths. The speed Bufang had shown just now was too amazing. I don't want to listen to you now, Bufang said faintly. The next moment, a mighty force exploded out of Bufang's arm. Susanoo felt a tremendous force rush into his body. Bam! That dark purple energy suddenly exploded. All the people who were bound by the tentacle fell like dumplings into a pot. Patriarch Peng Lai reacted quickly. Then he slapped the water with his hand. Bam! An explosion rang out. Seawater splashed into the air. They turned into soft ocean balls that wrapped around the people's bodies, causing them to float in the air. Susanoo's eyes went wide. The next moment, he let out a long roar. Blue veins bulged on his arm as he smashed it toward Bufang's head. The immortal robe is mine, Susanoo growled. Bam! However, his punch was caught by Bufang with a backhand. He clenched his fist, and with a crack, the front part of Susanoo's head was crushed. Bufang's face was expressionless. Then he kicked Susanoo in the chest. Bam! A deafening rumble rang out. Susanoo's back suddenly exploded, and the seawater split apart. His body was kicked backward, rolling and crawling. I hate it when people threaten me, said Bufang. The vermilion robe fluttered. The sleeves of his vermilion robe fluttered. When he reappeared, he was right in front of Susanoo, who had just risen from the sea. The tip of his foot kicked Susanu's chest again, and his chest exploded. In front of Bufong, Susanu was like a defenseless weakling. Susanu could hardly believe that the gap between him and Bufong was so big. A terrible divine sense suddenly fell on him. Susanu felt a chill run through his body. This coldness made him feel as if there was an aura of death spreading out. He saw death in Bufong's eyes. "I'm going to die." Susanu shuddered. The next moment, he jumped to his feet and was about to flee. Seeing Susanu running away in a panic, Lin Sanjiu was stunned. Bufong raised his hand and made a grabbing gesture at Susanu. Boom! At this moment, the water seemed to flow backward. Susanu's body was sent flying backward. Bufong clenched his fists. The muscles on his Taotai arm bulged, and the roar of a beast seemed to ring out from it. At that moment, everyone was in a trance. Bufong threw a punch. Susanu's body was instantly hit by the punch. Bam! The punch hit Susanu's body, causing it to explode in an instant. It turned into a torrent of blood and splashed down. This scene stunned everyone present. One punch had blown up a god. Susanu was the guardian of Sakura Island. Even Patriarch Penglai's beard trembled. He was taken aback. The corner of the great wizard's mouth twitched. He could not even hold his wand properly. Count Dracula could not even say a word. He had blown up Susanu with one punch. Doesn't this mean that Bufong also has the strength to kill us? How terrifying is the strength of this chef from Hua? Is it because of the immortal robe? For a moment, Dracula's desire for the vermilion robe grew stronger. For a moment, Dracula's desire for the vermilion robe grew stronger. An invisible wool was about to fly out of Susanu's shattered body. However, Bufong focused his eyes. The god of cooking's eye could see through everything. As he looked straight at it, Susanu's wool began to burn. The latter completely turned into nothingness, twisted, and disappeared. Perhaps Susanu himself had never wondered why things had turned out this way. In front of Bufong, he did not even have the strength to fight back. Poseidon and the others fell silent. Bufong's strength was beyond their imagination. Although they still had a backup plan, the fighting prowess that Bufong had shown just now was enough to dispel their thoughts of getting the vermilion robe. They had lost the treasure that occupied a quarter of Earth's spiritual energy in vain. They were very sad, but there was nothing they could do. Bound by Bufong, Vermilion Bird hovered beside Bufong. She was struggling. In the surrounding sea, Yugu and the others were held up by the water balls. They were dumbfounded as they watched Susanu explode. Brutal, violent, and too strong. Senior. My senior is too strong. Yuji's face flushed with excitement. Chief Luo, Xiao Ai, and the others were also shocked. Bufong had killed Susanu with one punch, as if he was crushing an ant. Then, he rested his eyes on Vermilion Bird. He frowned. He had a headache, wondering how he should deal with her. Suddenly, Bufong paused. He turned his head to look at the bronze gate in the distance. Suddenly, he remembered the pattern on the bronze gate. The pattern seemed to have told him a lot of information, and there seemed to be a lot of things sealed behind the sealing array on the bronze gate. Gurgle, gurgle. All of a sudden, the sea began to spin. It was as if a huge whirlpool had appeared, spinning ceaselessly. Everyone was shocked by this scene. Everyone turned to look at it. The whirlpool grew larger and larger, and in its center was a bottomless black hole. As the whirlpool grew larger, so did the black hole. Gradually, the hole grew larger and larger. Its diameter reached thousands of miles. Terrible spiritual energy surged out of the hole and spread rapidly, stirring up a gust of wind on the sea. What happened? Everyone was dumbfounded as they stared at the hole. The expressions of Patriarch Penglai and the others changed dramatically. They looked at Bufong and Vermilion Bird, who was standing behind Bufong, with complicated expressions on their faces. A seal. The seal on the spiritual energy sealing point was broken. The immortal robe and the egg were the keys to suppress the seal. The egg was broken, the immortal robe was taken away, and the seal was gone. The recovery of Earth's spiritual energy had begun. Chapter 16:16. The seal on the spiritual energy sealing point had been broken. The spiritual energy had been completely restored. This was something that everyone present had been looking forward to for a long time. They had simulated it for a long time just for this moment, hoping that they could be prepared when the spiritual energy was completely restored. It would also weaken the impact of the revival of spiritual energy on the world. Bufong held the divine sense ribbon in one hand, and the other end was connected to Vermilion Bird. However, Bufong's focus at the moment was not on Vermilion Bird, but on the huge black hole in the distance. It was a shocking scene. The seawater swirled and turned into a huge black hole, which kept rumbling and spinning. When the water flowed into it, it seemed to be devoured, bringing an unparalleled visual impact. Patriarch Punglai and the others were extremely excited. They stared at the scene, so excited that their bodies were trembling. Count Dracula, Poseidon, and the others all knew what it meant. The complete restoration of spiritual energy would have a great impact on the whole Earth and the whole world. Bam! Bam! A pillar of spiritual chi that was almost condensed into a solid substance shot out from the black hole and rushed straight into the sky. Boom! In a flash, it shot straight into the clouds. It was as if it had poked a hole in the sky. The huge crater caused the sky to spin unceasingly. A violent rumble rang out, and the calm sky began to tremble in all directions, as if a stone had been thrown into a pond. This is... Patriarch Punglai looked up, and all that was left in his eyes was the shocking scene. It was as if it was the work of a real god. Rumble. At this moment, the sky turned into 7 colors. Bam! Bam! Suddenly, at this moment, the whole earth seemed to be shaking. Light beams also shot into the sky from 3 different directions on Earth. They were located at the 3 extremes of the Earth. Bufong was now in the south. The rest were in the north, east, and west. They corresponded to the east, west, and south. At this moment, the whole Earth seemed to wake up like a giant beast that had been dormant for a long time. The colorful sky was indescribably beautiful. Suddenly, it began to rain. Voila! 7-colored rain fell from the sky at a rapid speed. It was sparse and connected to form a curtain. It was an extremely stimulating visual impact. Spiritual Chi Rain. The real spiritual Chi Rain. Patriarch Punglai burst out laughing. He spread his hands and felt the feeling of the rain falling on his body. I feel it. I feel the return of the immortals. Patriarch Punglai looked very excited. He took off his bamboo hat and bathed himself in the rain. The rainwater fell on his body and was absorbed by his pores, causing a dense mist to rise. Dense spiritual chi spread out in the void. Everyone spread out their hands. Their bodies and minds felt incomparably joyful. Although some people still didn't understand what was happening, this rain made them incomparably thirsty. Rumble. The Earth's crust seemed to be moving. The tremors were very intense. The ordinary people who were drenched in the rain cried out in alarm. They discovered that various changes had occurred to their bodies. Some of them had sharp horns on their heads. Some of them had a pair of goshawk wings on their backs. Some of them had streams of water swirling around their bodies for a moment. The experts who were drenched in the rain all possessed extremely strange abilities. This was the awakening of their talents. Humans are the descendants of gods, and they have inherited their talents and abilities. However, in the long years of reproduction, these abilities and talents have fallen asleep in the depths of our blood, and they need stimulation to awaken. And this spiritual chi rain is the opportunity to awaken them. Poseidon's eyes were very deep. He burst out laughing. He no longer wanted to compete with Bufong for the immortal robe. With the recovery of spiritual energy, a great era was coming, and he, the sea god, needed to welcome the returning gods. Rumble. The water under Poseidon's feet exploded. It turned into a long bridge that stretched across the sea. He stood on the bridge. The water wriggled naturally, pushing him toward the west at high speed. Before long, he was gone. Patriarch Punglai gave Bufong a deep look, then stepped on an auspicious cloud and sped away, heading toward Hua. Dracula and the great wizard could not wait any longer. and they ran as fast as they could. The recovery of the spiritual chi rain made them understand that a real great era was coming. It seemed that those gods who had left Earth would begin to return and descend. Those heaven immortals and immortal kings who had left Earth would also return. The humans who had obtained superpowers were wild with joy. They were close to the point where the spiritual energy was gushing out, so they were the most direct beneficiaries. Everyone's face was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Hugo was also amazed. He felt that his cultivation base had grown, breaking through the shackles of an earth chi cultivator and rushing into the realm of a heaven chi cultivator. Was this the so-called fortune? Chief Luo, Xiao Ai, the monk, and the other superhumans were also amazed. Their superpowers began to grow rapidly as well. They thought it was a gift from God. Bufang stepped on the water. The recovery of spiritual energy had made everyone surprised at Susanu's death disappear. Now, they were immersed in the joy of awakening their abilities. However, Bufang glanced at them, and his expression did not change much. Was it really worth celebrating to have obtained a superpower? The greater one's ability was, the more danger he would face. The more difficult it was for him to return to his ordinary life. These people were too young. He gave the huge pit a deep look. Bufang could feel a terrible aura emanating from the black hole. It was an oppressive feeling that came from another universe. He could not believe that the sleeping place of the artifact's spirit still hid so many secrets. The artifact's spirit had sealed one wormhole after another. Behind these wormholes seemed to be connected to vast universes. Now, the wormhole was open. Bufang did not know whether this was a good thing or not. However, Bufang felt that he had a responsibility to do something. He took a deep breath. Bufang fixed his eyes directly on the hole. Rumble. A violent rumble rang out. Then, all the humans, who were immersed in joy, woke up with a start and turned to look at the hole. Crunch. Crunch. It seemed that some terrible creature was about to crawl out of the hole. Roar. An invisible roar rang out, seeming to have the power to frighten the souls of everyone. What? What's that? It's so scary. So big. Is that a goat? Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at the huge goat's head poking out of the hole. The creature with a goat's body was covered with a dark aura. Is this the Grim Reaper from a small country's mythology? Chief Luo cried out involuntarily. As the director of the Jiangdong branch of the state's supernatural bureau, his knowledge was far greater than that of ordinary people. In fact, as early as the emergence of superpowers, he had carefully studied the ancient myths and legends of many countries. He found that the gods in those myths and legends were actually quite similar to superhumans. They could be said to be stronger gods. In front of him, the huge creature that seemed to be about to crawl out of the hole had the head of a goat, the tail of a scorpion, and a body full of dark aura. It was the legendary Grim Reaper. Crunch. Crunch. Bufang's eyes flickered slightly. The creature that was about to crawl out of the hole had a very strong aura. It was even stronger than Poseidon, the god of the sea. Bufang raised his eyebrows. His divine sense suddenly spread out, Bufang's divine sense spread out and was shocked to find that the range it covered had increased. It seemed that because of the recovery of Earth, the pressure on his divine sense had decreased a lot. Naturally, Bufang didn't care about this. He loosened the divine sense chain that bound Vermilion Bird, stepped on the air, and shot out. In the distance, the humans returned from their joy and were shrouded in the aura of death. However, at this moment, they were shocked to find that Bufang had flown out and was hovering above the head of the huge creature that had crawled out of the hole. The huge goat's head was raised. Bufang didn't know which country's mythology this god was, but under Bufang's divine sense, he found that this guy had teleported here through a wormhole. Behind him, there were many teams lined up and waiting. Moreover, Bufang found that the teleportation point of the wormhole would change. In other words, the universe behind this creature had only existed on Earth for a short time. This creature had to crawl out as soon as possible. Bufang thought of many things. Perhaps the ancient mythological figures of Hua also arrived on Earth through teleportation from other universes? Bufang raised his eyebrows. It was a bold idea, but it was very possible. Perhaps, after this universe disappeared, the next universe to appear in the black hole would be connected to the universe where the ancient immortals of Hua went. The more Bufang thought about it, the more likely it was. Of course, the most important thing now was to get this creature with the goat's head back. Roar! Damn mortals! Your god of death wants to return to Earth. Get lost! The goat stared at Bufang with its scarlet eyes. It had the head of a goat, the body of a human, and the tail of a scorpion. Its aura was much stronger than that of Patriarch Punlai and the others. Its attitude was also much more arrogant. Get lost. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. If it weren't for the fact that this fellow only had a goat's head and was not a good ingredient, Bufang would have roasted a whole goat. But now, Bufang took a deep breath. Then he raised his Taotai arm. Boom! Bufang's punch contained a vast amount of spiritual energy as it smashed down toward the goat's head. Stupid mortal, get lost. The goat-headed creature looked at Bufang with disdain. It raised its head and aimed its sharp horn at Bufang. All of a sudden, the goat's horn collided with Bufang's fists. The contrast was very strong. In front of this fiend god, Bufang was like a fly. But when the fist smashed down, bam, the goat's horn shattered and cracked. A tremendous force exploded out, like the rumbling of a star. The whole earth seemed to be shaking. The fiend god's head seemed to have been smashed to pieces. The tremendous force pushed its body, which was halfway out of the hole, back into the hole. No, I'll be back. When the goat's head was shoved back into the hole, it let out an unwilling roar. Everyone was dumbfounded. Chief Luo was shaking all over. That was the god of death in the myth of a small country, a real god. How could it be beaten back by Bufang? Bufang clapped his hands. He looked at the black hole, which had calmed down a little. He exhaled. What he did could only make the black hole stop for a while and did not have much effect on the overall situation. But at least Bufang had tried his best. After all, he was the one who created the black hole. In the distance, a loud and clear bird cry resounded through the air. Bufang froze. He turned his head to look. He saw the vermilion bird burst into flames. The next moment, she broke free from Bufang's divine sense, spread her wings, turned into a vermilion bird, and sped away into the distance. It looked like she was trying to escape. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Let's get out of here. It's not safe here anymore. Bufang glanced at the crowd and said. Then, he stepped into the void and chased after the vermilion bird. Chief Luo and the others were stunned. Yugo was even more confused. The big, flaming red bird that had appeared just now, that seems to be the divine beast guarding the south in Hua's myth. The vermilion bird? Yugo said in a daze. Rumble. A rumbling sound came from the black hole. Mighty spiritual energy kept gushing out of it. After what had just happened, everyone knew that danger was approaching. So, they hurriedly ran toward the jewel. When they boarded the ship, it whistled and sailed toward the coast of Hua. Everyone on the ship understood. The world was about to change. However, they didn't expect that. The ship had not gone far when they witnessed the changes in the world. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.